Welcome back, legends. You're at Bald Voldemort. Another incredible story awaits. What if Dr. Strange adopted Harry and made him the Sorcerer Supreme before his Hogwarts letter? Subscribe and hit the bell. Let's dive right in. Chapter 1. The Cupboard and the Cloak. The artifact was a pocket watch. Not metaphorically, it was literally a pocket watch. Gold-cased and unremarkable to anyone without the ability to sense the dimensional resonance bleeding off it like heat off summer asphalt. Strange had tracked it from a collector's estate in Bath, through 2 separate tube stations, and somehow to this suburb of Surrey, which was quite possibly the most aggressively beige place he had ever been in his life. Privet Drive. He stood at the end of it and checked the locator spell, a thin thread of blue-white light that curled from his fingers, and pointed with absolute certainty toward number 4. The houses on either side were identical in the way that suggested someone had built them with a stamp. Same roof lines, same hedges trimmed to the same aggressive rectangularity, same cars in the same driveways. Strange had once navigated a pocket dimension held together by the dreams of a dying god, and this street made him more uncomfortable than that had. He adjusted his collar against the October wind and walked. The watch had belonged to a warlock named Carmichael, who had died 3 weeks ago in his bathroom, and whose estate his nephew was selling off in pieces without understanding what half of it was. The watch itself was a resonance anchor, an artifact from the 15th century designed to keep a specific location stable across dimensional fluctuations. In the right hands, useful. In the wrong hands, or in no hands at all, sitting on a shelf in a Surrey sitting room, it would eventually destabilize the local reality enough that Strange would have a significantly larger problem on his hands than one pocket watch. He rang the doorbell. The man who answered was large in the way that suggested he'd once been athletic and had made a series of increasingly comfortable decisions since then. He had a thick neck and a very small mustache and the expression of someone who had been personally offended by the existence of Mondays. "Yes," said the man. "Vernon Dursley," Strange said. The man's eyes moved quickly to Strange's hands, the scarred knuckles, the faint luminescence that Strange had mostly learned to suppress but which still flickered occasionally in low light. Then up to the cloak of levitation, which was doing that thing it sometimes did where it moved slightly in the absence of wind. "What do you want?" Dursley said, and his voice had gone a half step higher. "I'm here about an artifact in your possession. A pocket watch, gold case, no maker's mark with a blue second hand." "I need it back. I don't know what It came from the Carmichael estate," Strange said. "You attended the sale 3 weeks ago. You bought a box lot for £40. The watch was in it." He paused. "I'm not here about anything else, just the watch. Give it to me and I'll leave." Dursley stared at him. Something moved behind those small eyes, calculation, and underneath the calculation, something that looked a great deal like fear. But it wasn't the kind of fear that Strange associated with someone confronted by the inexplicable. It was the kind that came from guilt. The specific, sour fear of someone who was afraid of being found out. Strange had spent enough years reading people to notice the difference. "Fine," Dursley said finally. "Wait here." He disappeared into the house. Strange stood on the doorstep and listened, footsteps going toward the back, a drawer opening, a drawer closing. He was about to look away when he heard something else. A sound from below him, not below the doorstep, below the house. Below the floor or close to it, a small, quiet sound that didn't belong to the ventilation or the pipes or any of the ordinary explanations his mind immediately tried to provide. It was rhythmic, barely audible. It took him 3 full seconds to identify it because it had been long enough since he'd heard it that his brain needed to catch up. Someone was counting. Quietly, steadily, in a child's voice. Counting the way you might count when you were trying to make time pass. Strange looked down and to his left. There was a door there, small, set under the stairs with a bolt on the outside. A cat flap at the bottom. A small grill above the cat flap that let in a line of light roughly the width of 2 fingers. He crouched. Through the grill he could see almost nothing. The interior was dark, a mattress, the edge of a blanket. He could hear breathing now that he was listening for it. Small and steady and carefully controlled. He could sense the magic, and that was what made him go very still, because the magical signature coming through that grill was not the ordinary ambient hum of a child with undeveloped ability. It was structured, dense. It moved in patterns he hadn't seen outside of Camertage, and even there only in students who had been training for years. The resonance had a quality to it, a depth, that made the resonance anchor in the sitting room feel like a penlight compared to a bonfire. Whatever was in that cupboard was not ordinary. Dursley came back to the door with the watch. Strange stood up slowly. "How long," he said, and his voice was very quiet, "has there been a child living under your stairs?" Dursley's face went through several colors. "That's family business," he said. "That's private. How long?" The cloak shifted. Not dramatically, it didn't need to be dramatic. It just settled around Strange's shoulders in a way that suggested it was paying close attention, and the air in the doorway did something that it hadn't been doing a moment before. Dursley swallowed. "Since he was a baby." Strange took the watch from Dursley's hand without looking at it. "Unlock the door," he said. "Now, see here. Unlock the door," Strange said. "Or I will unlock it myself, and then we will have a much longer conversation about everything that comes after." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. There was a version of Stephen Strange who had once been a surgeon, precise, controlled, entirely accustomed to being the most technically capable person in any given room, and that version had been improved upon in ways that were difficult to articulate but very easy to perceive if you were standing close to him. Dursley perceived it. He went to the cupboard door, slid the bolt, and stepped back. Strange opened it. The boy inside was sitting on his mattress with his back against the wall, and his knees pulled to his chest. He was small, very small for his age, which Strange estimated at 6 or 7. Dark hair that looked like it had been cut with kitchen scissors. Round glasses with a cracked left lens that had been repaired with what appeared to be Scotch tape. He was wearing clothes that were not his, too large, worn through at the elbows, the kind of clothing that comes from someone who has learned to take what they can get. He had the greenest eyes Strange had ever seen. He looked up at Strange with absolutely no fear on his face. That was the thing that stopped Strange most completely, not the state of the cupboard, not the evidence of how long this had been happening, but the child's face, which was calm and watchful and deeply, carefully evaluating. He was counting exits. Strange recognized it because he did the same thing. "Hello," the boy said. "Hello," said Strange. He crouched down so they were eye level. "What's your name?" "Harry. Harry." Strange looked at the cupboard, the books stacked neatly in one corner, a spider in a matchbox on the shelf, the marks on the wall that might have been a calendar. "How long have you been in here, Harry?" "Which time?" Harry said. Strange held very still. "This time," the boy continued. 3 days. Before that, a week. Before that, he paused, doing arithmetic. "I don't always know the exact number." Strange turned to look at Dursley, who was standing by the front door with his arms crossed, performing an emotion that was somewhere between defiance and the kind of man who has made a decision he knows was wrong and has decided the only way forward is aggression. "He's dangerous," Dursley said. "He does things, unnatural things, you know, wouldn't you?" "Being like you are. He burned Dudley's hair off last month. He's 7 years old," Strange said. "He's not normal." Strange looked back at Harry, who was watching this exchange with that same careful, measuring expression. Somewhere inside the dense, extraordinary magical signature radiating off this child was something else, a thread of something old and specific that Strange had felt before, years ago in a different context. A scar, thin as a hair but bright as a fault line, running through the boy's magical field like a crack in glass. Someone had tried to do something to this child. Something final. And the magic had refused. "Can I see your scar?" Strange said quietly. Harry reached up and pushed his hair back from his forehead without question or hesitation. The scar was small and lightning-shaped, and when Strange looked at it with the sight, it was still faintly luminescent in a way that told him everything he needed to know about what Harry Potter had survived. "Okay," Strange said. He stood. He looked at Dursley. "Harry is coming with me." "You can't just—" "I can," Strange said. And I am, whatever legal process you feel needs to happen after this can happen. I'll have a solicitor contact you. He looked back at Harry. Can you walk? Yes, Harry said. He climbed off the mattress with the careful, economical movements of someone who had learned not to make any noise when they didn't have to. He was wearing socks that didn't match. Do you have anything you want to bring? Harry considered this seriously, the way children do when they're asked a question they intend to answer honestly. Then he went to the shelf and picked up the matchbox with the spider in it. All right, Strange said. Harry walked out of the cupboard and stood in the hallway of 4 Privet Drive and looked up at the cloak, which was doing its thing again, that slight autonomous movement, the hem drifting half an inch to the left and back. Harry watched it with an expression of pure, uncomplicated fascination. Is it alive? Harry asked. That's a matter of ongoing philosophical debate, Strange said. The cloak drifted toward Harry and touched his shoulder, very briefly, in something that could only be described as a pat. Harry looked at Strange. Strange looked at the cloak. Don't start, he said to the cloak. He turned back to Dursley, who had gone very pale. You'll be hearing from my solicitor, Strange said. I'd suggest being cooperative. A pause. I'd also suggest being honest with yourself about what kind of person locks a child under the stairs. That particular reckoning isn't mine to deliver, but I'd start the conversation with yourself sooner rather than later. He didn't wait for a response. He led Harry out the front door and closed it behind them, and they stood on the path outside number 4 under a sky the color of old pewter, and Harry looked at him. Where are we going? Harry asked. New York, Strange said. If that's all right with you. Harry thought about it. I've never been to New York. It's loud and expensive and there are too many people, Strange said, but the building I live in is interesting. Interesting how? It has more rooms than it should have, Strange said. And some of them are in different dimensions. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked back at the house. Then he looked at the matchbox in his hand. Okay, he said. Strange opened a portal. The sling ring spun gold and the circle opened in the air, the sanctum's entrance hall visible through it, warmly lit, bookshelves and staircases and Wung's characteristic organizational system, which was in constant war with Strange's. The portal hummed at its edges. Harry stood in front of it and did not flinch, did not step back, did not make the sound that most adults made the first time they saw one open. He tilted his head slightly and examined it. The light at the edges, he said. Is it burning, or is it just what the boundary looks like? Strange looked at him carefully. What makes you ask that? It looks like it's between things, Harry said. Like it can't decide if it's one thing or another. Strange had written a paper at Camertage about the quantum phenomenological nature of portal boundaries that had said almost exactly that in significantly more words. He looked down at this 7-year-old boy with the cracked glasses and the matchbox spider and tried to think of something appropriate to say. He stepped through the portal. Harry followed without hesitation. The entrance hall of the Sanctum Sanctorum received them the way it always did. The slight adjustment of air pressure, the faint hum of the building's own considerable magical reserves noting the arrival of something new, the staircases shifting fractionally as if the building were turning to look. Strange sealed the portal behind them. Wung appeared from the direction of the library in the way he often did, silently, carrying a book and apparently entirely unsurprised by the presence of a small child in the entranceway. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. This is Wung, Strange said. He runs the library and has strong opinions about organizational systems. Hello, Harry said. Hello, said Wung. He looked at Strange. Explanation. He was in a cupboard. A cupboard, Wung repeated. Under the stairs at a house in Surrey. Wung looked at Harry again. The look lasted approximately 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds Strange saw Wung doing the same thing he had done, reading the magical signature, processing it, arriving at a conclusion that was visible only in the slight change in his posture. Then Wung closed his book. Are you hungry? Wung said to Harry. Yes, Harry said, without any of the hesitation that Strange had half expected, the kind of hesitation that came from being taught that wanting things was a problem. The kitchen is this way, Wang said. Harry followed him. At the doorway to the kitchen, he stopped and looked back at Strange. Are you coming? Harry said. Strange looked at this child, this extraordinary, impossible, clearly half-starved child standing in his entranceway asking him a simple question, and felt something shift in the architecture of his chest in a way that he did not entirely know what to do with. Yes, Strange said. I'm coming. Wang made eggs, which Harry ate with the focused, methodical attention of someone who had learned that food was not a guarantee. Strange sat across the kitchen table and watched and tried to remember the last time he'd felt this profoundly unprepared for anything. He'd faced interdimensional threats. He'd negotiated with beings old enough to predate the concept of time. He'd died repeatedly in a time loop and figured out how to survive each iteration. He had absolutely no framework for this. What do you do? Harry asked him between bites. With the magic. I protect things, Strange said. Dimensional boundaries, mostly. Places where the fabric of reality is thin enough that things from other dimensions can push through. Harry processed this. What kind of things? Varies. Sometimes entities, beings that don't have a physical form the way we do. Sometimes forces. Occasionally someone who knows enough to open a door but not enough to understand what comes through it. Like a watch, Harry said. Strange blinked. What? The watch, that's why you were there, isn't it? There was a watch that was doing something. I could feel it sometimes, in the kitchen, like when a television's on in another room. Strange set his coffee down. You could feel the resonance anchor. Is that what it's called? Strange looked at Wang. Wang looked back with the expression of a man who was going to say, I told you something extraordinary was happening, but was too professional to phrase it that way. Harry, Strange said, the magic you do, the things that Mr. Dursley mentioned, have you been doing it long? Harry put his fork down and appeared to think about this carefully with the same seriousness he applied to everything. I don't really do it, he said. It just happens, when I'm upset or scared, or sometimes when I'm bored. He looked at his hands. I made flowers grow out of the garden once because I was thinking about them, and I disappeared from the school roof once when some boys were chasing me. I ended up on the chimney. Where did you mean to go? Strange said. I don't know, Harry said. Away, I suppose. What does it feel like? Strange said. When you do it. Harry was quiet for a moment. Outside, the October wind was pushing against the sanctum's windows, and the building was doing what it did, breathing, almost adjusting. Harry looked up at the ceiling and then back at Strange. Like water, he said, when it's good. Like there's a current, and I can feel which way it goes, and if I push with it, it works. When I'm scared, it's more like heat. Like something's on fire and I can't really aim it, it just goes. He said it the way you described the color of the sky, like it was simply true, simply there, not strange, not frightening. Strange leaned forward. Has anyone ever taught you anything about it? No, Harry said. There was nobody to ask. The simplicity of that sentence landed in the room with a weight that was disproportionate to its size. There was nobody to ask. Not nobody who knew the answers, not nobody who would understand, just nobody. Period. Strange looked at his own scarred hands on the table, and then at this boy's small, careful face, and thought about the sanctum's empty east wing bedroom that no one had ever used, and thought about what it would mean to change the answer to that sentence. Would you like someone to ask? Strange said. Harry looked at him very directly. Yes, he said. All right, Strange said. Then you'll stay here. He paused. If you want to, I want to be clear, I'm not your uncle. I'm not going to bolt you into anything. You can leave whenever you want. Harry looked at the kitchen, which was warm and lit and smelled like food, with books visible through the doorway and a staircase that led to approximately 20 more floors of interesting things. He looked at the cloak of levitation, which had followed them into the kitchen, and was currently draped over the back of a chair like a cat that had decided it owned the furniture. I'd like to stay, Harry said. The cloak lifted one corner and patted Harry on the shoulder again. You and the cloak have a rapport, Wang said, with the tone of someone noting a meteorological event. I like it, Harry said. It's like it's thinking. It is, Strange said. We've had arguments. Who wins? It's 50-50, Wang said. Strange gave Wang a look. It is not 50-50. The first week was an education in the art of figuring things out as you went. Strange cleared the east wing bedroom, cleared it properly, not just moved things to the hallway, which was his normal methodology, but actually sorted and stored, because it was going to be someone's room. He found a bed that was the right size, which was not as straightforward as it sounded in a building with rooms that sometimes changed dimensions. He found books. He found, in a chest in the attic that hadn't been opened in 12 years, a collection of illustrated volumes on the history of the mystic arts that he'd been using as a footstool, and that turned out to be exactly the right level for a 7-year-old who read with the focus of a graduate student. Harry adapted to the sanctum in about 3 days. Not gradually, all at once, the way a key fits a lock. He moved through the corridors with the easy confidence of someone mapping a place he already half knew. He found the library on his own and started pulling books down with the considered selectivity of someone who had already thought about what he wanted to know. He found the training room on the second day and stood in the doorway for a long time looking at the equipment, and when Strange found him there, Harry looked up and said, "When can we start?" "You've been here 2 days," Strange said. "I know," Harry said. "When can we start?" Strange taught him the basics, breathing first, because everything started there, the way Wong had first taught Strange himself. The art of centering, of finding the still point. Harry sat cross-legged in the training room and breathed and went somewhere inside himself with the ease that would have taken most students months, and Strange stood in the doorway and watched, and tried not to think too hard about what that meant. He contacted a solicitor. There were papers. The Dursleys, as predicted, were entirely cooperative in the way of people who were relieved to have a problem they'd never wanted resolved without their having to do anything further about it. The paperwork establishing Strange as Harry's legal guardian in the mundane legal sense took 3 weeks. In the magical sense, whatever that would ultimately look like, Strange suspected it was already done, in the way the sanctum sometimes decided things before the people inside it caught up. He also made one other contact. The Ancient One had a way of knowing things before you told her, which Strange had never entirely gotten used to despite years of exposure. When he called on her, she was sitting in the highest room of Camertage with the Himalayan morning coming through the window, and she looked at him with those calm, deep eyes before he'd said a word. "You found him," she said. "You knew about him," Strange said. It was not a question. "I knew there was a child," she said. "I did not know where, or in what circumstances." A pause. "I trust the circumstances were what you'd expect, given the route magic takes when it has nowhere to go." "He was in a cupboard," Strange said. The Ancient One was quiet for a moment. "Then you were there at the right time." "I was there for a pocket watch." "Yes," she said, with the particular quality of agreement that meant she knew considerably more than she was saying and had decided that wasn't Strange's business right now. "Bring him to Camertage when he's ready, not before." "When will I know?" "You'll know," she said. "You already know, you're asking me to confirm it." Strange looked at her. "He's 7 years old." "He is," she said. "And he's been magical longer than 7 years." She was right. Of course she was right. Strange had spent the first week quietly and methodically examining the layers of Harry's magical signature, peeling them back the way you might strip paint to find the original wall, and what he'd found was a palimpsest. The magic that was purely Harry's, that deep, structured, extraordinarily capable current, and underneath it, threaded through it, the remnant of something else. A dark curse, old and absolute, that had been turned back on itself. The scar was the mark of that, but it had done something else, too. Something that Strange hadn't been able to fully articulate yet. It had left a thread of something foreign in Harry's magical field, like a splinter that had embedded too deep to pull out cleanly. He was not going to tell Harry that. Not yet. Not until he understood it better himself. He went back to the sanctum. Harry was in the library, cross-legged on the floor with a book open across his knees and a second one open beside him, and he was making notes in the careful, slightly too large handwriting of a child who has taught himself to write. "What are you reading?" Strange said. "The first one is about elemental theory," Harry said, "and the second one is about dimensional architecture, but I think they're talking about the same thing from different directions, and neither of them says that. Strange sat down on the floor next to him, which was not something he normally did, and looked at the books. Harry was right. He was absolutely, precisely right, and it was a connection that Strange had made himself years ago and had never seen laid out so simply. "That's correct," Strange said. Harry looked at him. "Why didn't they just say it?" "Because the people who wrote them thought they were different disciplines," Strange said, "and no one goes back and rewrites the fundamentals once everyone agrees on them." "That seems like a mistake," Harry said. "It is," Strange said. "Make a note." Harry made a note. The night of the third week, Strange was in his study when he heard Harry. Not crying, nothing like that. The sound was specific and immediately recognizable, the kind of nightmare that surfaces as sound before it surfaces as waking. Strange was out of his chair before he'd consciously decided to move, which told him something about himself that he filed away for later. Harry was sitting up in bed when Strange pushed the door open, breathing hard, glasses on the nightstand. Without them, his eyes were slightly unfocused, wide and green in the low light from the corridor. "Sorry," Harry said immediately. "I didn't mean to." "You don't need to apologize for nightmares," Strange said. "I wasn't going to," Harry hesitated. "I just meant I didn't mean to wake you." Strange sat on the edge of the bed. The room was warm. He'd adjusted the heating twice because the sanctum ran cold in October, which was fine for Strange and Wung, but not for a child who had been eating barely enough to maintain body temperature for what appeared to be most of his life. "Do you want to talk about it?" Strange said. Harry was quiet for a moment. "There's always a green light," he said, "in the dreams, and someone laughing, and then it stops and I'm in the dark and I don't know where the light went." Strange had read enough to know what that green light was. What it meant that Harry carried the memory of it not as something witnessed, but as something survived from inside. He kept his face neutral. "Does the dark feel bad?" Strange said. "Or just different?" Harry thought about it. "Just different, like the dark isn't the scary part. The scary part was before it." "The laughing," Strange said. "Yes." Strange was quiet for a moment. "You know," he said, "that you survived something that wasn't supposed to be survivable." Harry looked at him. "How do you know about that?" "I'm very good at reading magical signatures," Strange said. "Yours has a story in it. You don't have to know all the details right now, but you should know that whatever you survived, it was not because of luck. Something in you refused. That's not a small thing." Harry looked down at his hands the way he had a habit of doing. "Does it go away, the dreaming?" "Not entirely," Strange said, "but it changes shape. The more you understand what happened, the less it has to ambush you." Harry nodded slowly. Then he said, without looking up, "Why did you take me with you? You came for a watch." Strange considered giving him a comfortable answer. Several presented themselves, the practical ones, the ones about responsibility and the right thing to do. He discarded all of them. "Because you looked at me like you were trying to figure out if I was worth trusting," Strange said, "and that told me you'd been let down enough times that trust had become a calculation. And I thought that calculation deserved better data." Harry looked up. He had the expression of someone who has received an honest answer and is not entirely sure what to do with it. "Okay," he said finally. "Go back to sleep," Strange said. "We're starting actual practice with the sling ring tomorrow, and you need to be able to focus." "The portal ring," Harry said, and there it was, that flash of uncomplicated excitement that Strange was beginning to identify as Harry's resting state when he wasn't being careful. "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Strange said. "Sleep." He left the door half open and went back to his study and sat down and looked at the resonance anchor on his desk, which he'd been meaning to lock away all week and kept not getting to. He had a ward to activate. He had 17 reports from various Sanctum affiliates to review. He had a growing pile of correspondence from the ancient one that he'd been putting off. He had, apparently, a child now, which was not a sentence he had ever expected to apply to his own life, and which sat in his chest with a weight that was not entirely uncomfortable. He locked the watch away. He looked at the correspondence. He thought about green eyes and a matchbox spider, and the way Harry had followed him through a portal without a second thought, and the way that had felt less like a burden and more like something clicking into place. He picked up his pen. He started on the reports. Outside the sanctum's windows, New York did what it always did, which was continue loudly and without apology, and somewhere in the East Wing, a small boy with extraordinary magic slept through the rest of the night without the green light finding him. The cloak was draped over Harry's door handle in the morning. Strange had not put it there. He looked at it. It shifted slightly, in the breeze from the heating vent, with what he could only describe as an air of innocence. "I'm not having this conversation," Strange said. The cloak did not respond, which was how it always won. He called the Ancient One that afternoon. "He's ready," Strange said. "I know," she said. "You could have just told me that when I called last week." "You needed to figure it out yourself," she said. "That's generally how it works." Strange looked at the training room, where Harry was sitting in the center of the floor, the sling ring on his hand, concentrating on the space in front of him with the focused intensity of a child who has been told exactly what the thing should do and is determined to make it work. The air in front of him was shimmering faintly, not a portal, not yet, but a precursor to one, which was considerably further than most first-day students got. "He's going to be something," Strange said. "He already is something," the Ancient One said. "The question is what he chooses to do with it." Strange watched Harry's hands. The shimmer intensified, wavered, collapsed. Harry sat very still for a moment, then shook his hands slightly as if resetting and began again. He had been doing this for 40 minutes without complaint, without frustration, without anything except that focused, methodical application of effort. "What are you going to tell him?" the Ancient One said. "About the wizarding world. About what happened to his parents, about the prophecy." "Everything," Strange said. "Eventually, when he can use it." "Strange," she said, with a gentleness that he didn't hear from her often. "Don't wait too long." "I won't." Harry's third attempt cracked the air open, just slightly, just for a second, just enough for the faintest glimpse of somewhere else to flicker in the space between his palms before it closed again. Harry stared at the space where it had been, and then he looked up at Strange in the doorway with an expression of pure electric delight. "Did you see that?" he said. "I saw," Strange said. "I almost had it." "You had it," Strange said. "For 1.4 seconds you had it. Tomorrow you'll hold it for 3. Harry nodded with the decisiveness of someone accepting a mission parameter. He settled back into position, the sling ring catching the light, green eyes going distant and focused. The shimmer began to build again. Strange watched him and thought about what it costs to protect a world that didn't know you were protecting it, and about what it meant to have someone worth coming home to, and about the pocket watch that had been sitting in a sitting room in Surrey for 3 weeks before he'd gone to get it. Timing, the Ancient One had said once, was its own kind of magic. He was beginning to think she'd been right about that, too. Harry opened a portal at 4:47 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in October, and it lasted for 6 seconds before it closed, and he looked through it with his whole face lit up like something being handed what it had always needed. And Strange stood in the doorway of the training room of the Sanctum Sanctorum and watched, and did not say anything about the fact that his chest felt like a door swinging open. Some things you just let be what they are. That night Strange wrote one name in a notebook he kept for things that mattered. Harry Potter. Age 7. Survivor. Reader. Questions everything. Does not apologize for what he is. He underlined the last sentence. Then he wrote one more line underneath, the way he sometimes did when a thing wanted to be said and there was no one to say it to. Arrived looking for a watch. Found something worth keeping. He closed the notebook. He went to bed. Chapter 2. 4 years at the edge of the world, the Ancient One was exactly what Harry had expected and nothing like it. He'd built her in his head from the way Strange talked about her, carefully, the way you talk about something you respect enough to be precise about. He'd expected someone imposing, grave, the kind of old that sits on a person like armor. She was small. She was bald. She was standing in the middle of a camertage courtyard in the Himalayan morning light, cracking walnuts against the stone wall with the focused leisure of someone who had nowhere to be for the next 5 centuries. and when Harry walked through the gate with Strange behind him, she turned and looked at him with eyes that were the most alert thing he'd ever seen in a human face. "Harry," she said. "Hello," Harry said. He looked at the walnuts. "Would you like help with those?" Strange made a sound behind him. The Ancient One looked at Harry for a moment with an expression that might have been surprise if it had been allowed to fully form, and then she smiled, not the polished, managed smile of someone performing authority, but a real one, small and genuine. "Come," she said, and handed him a walnut. That was how it started. Camertage was 3 weeks out of every 2 months. The rest of the time was the Sanctum and Strange and Wung and the city below making its constant, unignorable noise. Harry loved all of it in different ways, the way you love different rooms of a house you've come to think of as yours. The Sanctum was systems. Strange taught in a way that was structured without being rigid. He'd lay out the framework of a concept, make sure Harry could see the shape of it, and then stand back and let Harry pull at it. Not laziness, Harry understood, but philosophy. Strange believed that the most dangerous kind of sorcerer was one who had been taught what to think rather than how. He said this frequently, usually when Harry had just done something unexpected with a technique that wasn't what the technique was supposed to do. "That's not how that works," Strange said. On the morning Harry was 10 years old, watching Harry use a containment ring to anchor himself during a vertical drop in the mirror dimension. "It worked," Harry said, dropping the last 8 feet to the inverted ground with the ease of someone who had been navigating impossible geometries since he was 8. "That's an entirely different statement," Strange said. "Something can work and still not be how it works. But if it works, then it works," Harry said. "The mechanism doesn't care whether I understand it." "The mechanism," Strange said, stepping off the edge of a floating building shard with the practiced casualness of long habit, landing beside Harry, "will absolutely care when the context changes and you're relying on an application you don't fully understand and it stops working for reasons you can't diagnose." Harry thought about that. "Fair," he said. Strange looked at him with the expression he got when Harry conceded a point, which happened rarely enough that Strange appeared to find it slightly suspicious every time. "Are you actually agreeing with me?" "I'm agreeing with the logic," Harry said, "which is related to you but not identical to you." Strange's expression cycled through several things, landed on something that was trying not to be amused and failed. "Get back up there and do it the right way." Harry grinned and jumped. The Ancient One taught differently. She taught the way rivers run. She'd say something that seemed simple, and you'd carry it for weeks, and then one day you'd be in the middle of something entirely unrelated, and the thing she'd said would open up and show you what it had actually meant. She had patience that felt less like virtue and more like a different relationship with time. Which, Harry eventually understood, it was. He didn't ask her about the time manipulation directly until he was 9. He'd been reading about temporal theory. Strange had a shelf of it, dense and complicated and occasionally contradictory, and he'd come to Camertage with questions that were sharper than usual. "Can you see forward?" he asked her. They were on the roof, where she had a habit of sitting in the mornings with tea she never seemed to actually drink. "Sometimes," she said. "And you knew I was coming," Harry said, not a question. "I knew someone was coming," she said. "I had a sense of the shape of them, a pattern in the probable futures, a fixed point you might call it, a place where things converged." She looked at him over her tea. "Why do you ask?" "Because if you can see forward," Harry said, "and you knew I was coming and you knew where I came from," he stopped. "Go on," she said. "Then you knew what was happening at Privet Drive," Harry said. "For years." The question underneath that wasn't spoken. She heard it anyway because she always heard the question underneath. "Yes," she said quietly. "I knew there was a child. I did not know the specifics. And she paused in the way she did when she was deciding how much honesty a moment could bear. "I made a calculation that the path to you was through Strange and that Strange's path to you required him to go to Surrey for reasons that had nothing to do with you." Harry was quiet for a moment. "So you waited," he said. "I waited," she agreed. "For how long?" 3 years, she said. The wind off the mountains came across the roof and moved the steam from her cup. Harry looked at his hands, the sling ring on his right hand, which he wore the way other people wore watches, habit and utility both. "I'm not angry," he said. "I'm trying to decide if I should be." "That's a reasonable thing to try to decide," she said. "Did you know what the cupboard was like?" he said. "Specifically." She was quiet for a moment that was a different kind of quiet than her usual ones. "I knew it was not good," she said. "I did not know the details." Harry nodded. He picked up one of the smooth stones from the roof ledge, turned it in his fingers, and set it back down. "Then I'm not angry," he said. "But I want you to know I thought about it." "I would have been concerned if you hadn't," she said. They sat in silence for a while. Below them, the students of Camertage moved through their morning forms, and Harry watched them with the comfortable attention of someone who is exactly where he's supposed to be. Wung was the one who taught Harry to fight. Strange taught theory and application. The Ancient One taught perception and philosophy. Wung taught Harry that magic without physical intelligence was a liability, and that the body needed to understand what the mind had learned before any of it would hold up under pressure. He was also, it turned out, the funniest person Harry had ever met, which was not what you'd expect from someone who looked like he'd been carved out of professional skepticism. "Again," Wung said. Harry was flat on his back on the training room floor. He had been flat on his back approximately 11 times in the last hour. The training staff he'd been working with was across the room where Wung had knocked it. "You keep dropping your left shoulder before you commit to the right," Wung said, "and I keep using it every time." "I know," Harry said, staring at the ceiling. "So stop doing it." "I'm working on it," Harry said. He got up. His shoulder ached in the specific way that meant he'd learn from it. He retrieved the staff, rolled it into position, and turned back to face Wung with his shoulder locked deliberately in place. Wung looked at his stance. "Better. Thank you. Don't thank me, you're about to be on the floor again." "Confident," Harry said. "Accurate," Wung said, and moved. Harry lasted 40 seconds longer than last time before he went down. When he got up, Wung had the expression he got when he was actually pleased but didn't feel the need to say so, and Harry had learned to read that one early. "That's the longest you've held that defensive form," Wung said. "I'm going to beat you eventually," Harry said. "Yes," Wung said. Harry blinked. "You think so?" "You're 10 years old," Wung said. "I've been training for 30 years. The fact that you'll eventually beat me is not remarkable. The speed at which you'll eventually beat me might be." He handed Harry a towel, in the way he did when a session was over, and Harry wiped his face and tried not to look as gratified as he felt, which was very. "Wung," Harry said. "What was strange like when he was learning?" Wung turned. There was something in his expression, not quite nostalgia, not quite amusement, something in between. "Furious," he said, "at being a student." He'd been a surgeon, the best one, he would have told you without much encouragement. And suddenly he was the worst in the room, and the gap between what he expected of himself and what he was capable of was the thing he had the hardest time with. Harry considered that. "He doesn't seem like that now." "No," Wung said. "He doesn't." He looked at Harry with that direct, measuring look. "Why do you ask?" "Because he never talks about it," Harry said. "The learning part, he talks about the doing part. What it was like when he understood things, what it felt like to get things right, but not the part before that." "Some things are easier to describe in retrospect," Wung said. Harry thought about green lights in dreams. "Yeah," he said. "I know." The incident with the sling ring happened 2 weeks before Harry turned 11. He was in the mirror dimension alone, which Strange had permitted since Harry was 9, on the grounds that Harry's spatial instincts were developed enough that the inverted geometry wasn't a disorientation risk. Harry had been using the mirror dimension the way some people use a swimming pool, to practice things that would have consequences in the real world, until the form was good enough that the consequences became manageable. He'd been working on a long-range portal. The goal was Camertage from New York, a distance that stretched the ring's capability to its theoretical edge. He'd done shorter versions of it. He'd done it assisted, with Strange observing and ready to correct. He was doing this one alone because he wanted to know if he could. The answer, as it turned out, was Almost. He got the portal open. He could see Camertage through it, the courtyard, the morning light, the specific stone of the arch that he'd chosen as his anchor point. And for a moment it was perfect, clean and stable and exactly what he'd wanted. Then the thread slipped. He'd known it was going to slip approximately half a second before it did, which was not enough time to do anything about it. The portal edge went unstable, not closing but fragmenting, which was considerably worse, the edges pulling in opposite directions and the space between them threatening to compress instead of seal. A fragmenting portal in the mirror dimension was one thing. The same fragmentation bleeding into the real dimension along the spatial line he'd established was another thing entirely. It would do to the physical space between New York and Tibet what a poorly thrown stone does to a window. Harry had approximately 3 seconds. He closed his fist on the ring and pulled, not at the portal but at the mirror dimension itself, using the only thing he could think of, which was to anchor the entire space to himself and let the portal close into him rather than into the real world. It worked the way most improvised solutions work. It solved the immediate problem and caused a different one, specifically that he was now the temporary convergence point for a collapsing spatial distortion, and his left hand felt like it was on fire. The mirror dimension sealed. The portal was gone. Harry was kneeling on the inverted floor of the mirror dimension with his left arm held against his chest and his breathing doing something complicated. He waited for the pain to clarify. His fingers still moved. No structural damage. The burning resolved over about 2 minutes into a deep ache and then faded entirely, the magical equivalent of catching a door before it slammed, he thought. Hand used instead of wall. Result was fine. Process had been genuinely frightening. He sat there for a while. Then he opened the mirror dimension exit and stepped back into the Sanctum training room, where Strange was standing with a cup of coffee that had apparently frozen halfway to his mouth, his eyes fixed on Harry with an expression Harry had never seen on his face before. "What happened?" Strange said. It was not a question. Harry told him. Precisely and completely, the way Strange had taught him to debrief after anything, without minimizing, without dramatizing, with every technical detail in order. Strange listened without interrupting, which was not entirely like him. When Harry was done, Strange set his coffee down on the windowsill and crossed the room and crouched in front of Harry and picked up his left hand. He turned it over, ran his fingers across the palm, checked the sling ring's fit, pressed 2 fingertips to Harry's pulse point and held them there for a moment that was clearly diagnostic and also clearly something else. "You're okay," Strange said. "I'm okay," Harry agreed. Strange looked at him. Strange looked at him for long enough that it became something specific, not an assessment, not an examination, but the particular look of someone measuring the distance between what happened and what could have happened and finding the gap uncomfortably small. "I know," Harry said quietly. "It was too far without a backup anchor. I won't do it again without one." "That's not," Strange stopped, restarted. "Yes, that's right. Don't do it again without one." He let go of Harry's hand and stood. "Are you sure you're not hurt?" "Positive." Strange picked up his coffee. He walked to the window and stood with his back to Harry for a moment that Harry recognized as Strange doing the thing where he needed to organize himself before he said something he'd decided to say. "I found you in a cupboard," Strange said to the window. "And I thought, I'll train him, I'll teach him, I'll make sure he's capable." That was the thinking. Capability as the answer to everything that happened before. Harry waited. "But capability doesn't make you not feel something when you come back from the mirror dimension with your hand against your chest, and I didn't know what had happened in there." Strange turned. His face was composed, professional, and entirely readable to anyone who'd spent 4 years learning to read it. "So I need you to hear me when I say, you can come to me. When things are too far, you don't have to wait until you've solved it." Harry looked at him. "Okay," he said, "I mean it." "I know," Harry said. I know you mean it." Something in Strange's posture let go fractionally. He nodded once. Then he said, "You did handle it correctly, for the record." The anchoring solution was the right call. "But with a backup anchor it wouldn't have been necessary," Harry said. "With a backup anchor it wouldn't have been necessary," Strange agreed. Run it again tomorrow, with the anchor. Yes, Harry said. Strange picked up his coffee, took a drink, and said casually, with his eyes already moving back to the window. Good instincts, by the way. Harry hid his smile by looking at his sling ring. Thanks. The Ancient One named him on a Sunday. Harry hadn't known it was coming. He'd been at Camertage for a 2-week session, longer than usual, though neither she nor Strange had explained why. He'd been training harder than usual, which he'd attributed to the session length. He'd been given access to restricted sections of the library that he'd normally had to ask for specifically, which he'd attributed to having reached a sufficient level of demonstrated competence. He'd been observed more frequently than usual during his independent practice sessions, which he'd attributed to, actually, looking back, he hadn't attributed that one to anything. He'd noticed it and filed it under things to think about later. The later arrived on a Sunday evening, in the open courtyard, with the mountains dark against the stars and the Camertage fires burning in their sconces. Strange stood to the side, hands clasped behind his back, wearing the expression he wore when he was deliberately not showing what he was thinking. Wung was there. A handful of senior masters, their faces lit in the fire glow, watching with attention that Harry now understood had been building toward this. The Ancient One stood before him and held out a circle of woven cord in a deep, dark blue. Harry looked at it. He looked at Strange. Strange's expression gave him nothing. He looked back at the Ancient One. What is this? He said. What do you think it is? She said. He could feel the energy off it. It was old, not the age of the cord itself, but of the intention threaded through it, the accumulated weight of whatever this ritual had meant the many times it had been performed before. He could feel the expectation in the courtyard like pressure. It's significant, he said. It is, she agreed. The title of Sorcerer Supreme is not a rank. It is not a certification. It is a responsibility, the most specific one in this tradition. It belongs to the individual best positioned, at any given moment, to protect the dimensional integrity of this world. She paused. That individual is always Strange. She looked at Strange. Strange looked back at her with an expression Harry couldn't fully read. At present, she said, it is Strange, and Strange as well. But I have looked at the paths forward, and I have seen places where the current flows are uncertain, where the protection of this world will need to be distributed rather than concentrated. I have seen futures where 2 people share the weight better than 1 person carries it alone. She looked at Harry. This is not a crown. It is not a gift. It is a weight, and I am asking you to carry it knowing what it means. Harry looked at the cord. He thought about the mirror dimension 2 weeks ago and the 3 seconds he'd had to solve the problem. He thought about Wung flat on the training room floor before Harry had gotten fast enough to put him there, and about Strange at the window saying, "You can come to me." He thought about a matchbox spider and a cracked lens and counting to make time pass. He reached out and took the cord. The Ancient One tied it around his right wrist, over the sling ring, not ceremonially, not dramatically, just with the same focused practicality she applied to everything. When she was done, she looked at him. Well, she said. Same question as always, Harry said. She raised an eyebrow. What do I do next? He said. She laughed, a real one, bright and unexpected, and behind Harry, Wung made a sound that was a cough covering a laugh, and Strange made a sound that Strange would have described as a sigh, and which was unambiguously a laugh failing to fully disguise itself. Tomorrow, the Ancient One said. We continue as we always have. Good, Harry said. He looked down at the cord on his wrist. He flexed his hand. He looked up at the mountains, which were the same mountains they'd been 5 minutes ago, and thought about the fact that the world felt exactly the same and also completely different. Strange appeared beside him. Sorcerer Supreme, Strange said. Don't, Harry said. No, it's, Strange paused. You deserve to hear it, you earned it. Harry looked at him. In the firelight, Strange looked like he'd been arranged by someone who wanted to ensure the moment landed correctly, the cloak moving in the cold mountain air, his face doing that thing where what he felt and what he showed were about 4 inches apart and closing. We both hold it, Harry said. That's what she said. That's what she said, Strange agreed. So we share the weight. Yes. Then you don't get to be impressed at me holding half of what you've been holding, Harry said. We're the same. Strange looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, You've been waiting to say that. Since she started talking, Harry said. Strange shook his head slowly with the expression that was not quite suppressed pride wearing a thin coat of exasperation. You're going to be insufferable. I've been insufferable since I was 8, Harry said. You said so yourself. I said you were occasionally insufferable. There's a difference. Occasionally implies the rest of the time I'm not, which I'm taking as a compliment. Strange made a sound. Wang, passing behind them toward the Camertage main building with a stack of records, said without turning, He's right. Wang, Strange said. Factually, Wang said, occasionally is a compliment, mathematically. He disappeared inside. Harry grinned. Strange looked at the mountains. After a moment he said, quietly enough that it wasn't quite part of the larger air, Your parents would have been proud of you tonight. Harry went still. Strange talked about his parents, James and Lily, their names, the shape of what had happened to them, with the careful honesty he applied to everything Harry needed to know. Harry knew the facts. He knew the names. He didn't always know what to do with the feelings attached to them, which were complex and various and sometimes arrived at inconvenient times. Right now they arrived as a warmth that sat high in his chest and was not uncomfortable. Tell me about them again, Harry said. When we get home. We'll talk tonight, Strange said. They stood in the courtyard while the fires burned down, and the masters filtered back inside, and the Himalayan dark settled over everything with the permanent quality of places that have been old for a very long time, and Harry wore the cord on his wrist and thought about the weight of things carried well. The letter came on a Tuesday. Harry was in the kitchen eating toast and reading a monograph on interspatial resonance patterns, dense, technical, and deeply interesting, when it dropped through the mail slot in the front door. It was different from the other mail, which generally arrived via the normal post or occasionally via Wang's system of intersanctum courier. This was hand-addressed in green ink. It had a wax seal. It was addressed with a specificity that suggested the sender knew more than the address alone. Mr. H. Potter, the East Wing Bedroom, the Sanctum Sanctorum, 177A Bleecker Street, New York, USA. Harry looked at it for a moment. He turned it over. He examined the seal, an H with 4 animals quartered around it, each distinct, each representing something that he already knew, because he'd read enough history of British magical institutions to have a working knowledge of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He took it to Strange's study. Strange was at his desk writing something, correspondence, probably, the stack to his left diminished from its morning height. He looked up when Harry entered. He looked at the letter in Harry's hand. He looked at the address and the seal. His hand stopped moving. Harry had learned Strange's silences. This one was the specific kind that came from a thing Strange had been expecting and had told himself he was ready for and was discovering in the actual moment that ready was a concept that did a lot of heavy lifting. It's the Hogwarts letter, Harry said. Yes, Strange said. You knew it was coming, Harry said. The ancient one said something to you. You've been different the last 3 weeks. Quieter. Strange set down his pen. I knew it was coming this year, yes. Harry sat in the chair across from him, the one he'd been sitting in for 4 years whenever they were going to talk about something that mattered. He held the letter. He hadn't opened it yet. Tell me what you know about it, Harry said. All of it, the parts you've been waiting to tell me. Strange looked at him. Then he leaned back in his chair and folded his scarred hands on the desk and said, How much time do you have? As much as it needs, Harry said. So Strange told him. He told him about Voldemort, the name, said plainly, without flinching, about the killing curse and why it had failed, about Lily Potter's sacrifice and the magic it had created. He told him about the prophecy, its language and its meaning and its limitations. He told him about Dumbledore, who Harry knew by name but not by character. He told him about the wizarding world, its structure and its flaws, its beauty and its institutional calcification. He told him about what it meant to be the boy who lived in that world, the mythology, the expectation, the way a name could become a cage if you let it. Harry listened to all of it without interrupting. He was good at that, not passive listening, but active, the kind where you can feel the shape of the information being built. When Strange was done, Harry said, "You think Voldemort isn't gone. I think the soul of someone willing to do what he did doesn't dissolve the way normal things dissolve," Strange said. "I think there's something left. I think it might be at Hogwarts. And I think," he paused, "I think you going is not just about your education." "You want me to find out what's there," Harry said. "I want you to go to school," Strange said immediately and then less immediately. "And if while you're at school you get a clear picture of whatever is using Quirinus Quirrell as a host body." Harry's head came up sharply. "You knew about that too," Harry said. "I've been monitoring," Strange said. "There's been a dark presence associated with Hogwarts for about 8 months. It's been consistent enough to have an identifiable signature. Quirrell's is the one that changed." A pause. "And don't look at me like that. I was going to tell you." "When?" Harry said. "Tonight, actually," Strange said with the honesty that was one of the things Harry had never found reason to doubt. "I was planning to tell you tonight." Harry considered this. He looked at the letter. "Okay," he said. "Okay. You were going to tell me, I believe you." Harry turned the letter over again. "Can I go?" Strange looked at him. "Of course you can go. And the other thing, finding out what's at Hogwarts, that is entirely your choice," Strange said. "You're not my operative. He stopped. Harry looked at him. "You're my kid," Strange said, with the flat simplicity of something that had been true for a long time and was only now being said out loud. "And I will not send you into anything. But if you want to look into it, I trust your judgment." Harry held the letter for a moment. He thought about every morning in the training room and every evening in the library and every conversation on this side of Strange's desk about the weight of protecting things. He thought about the cord on his wrist. "Then I'll go," Harry said. "And I'll look." He broke the wax seal. The letter was exactly what it was supposed to be, formal, correct, slightly stuffy in the way of very old institutions. It confirmed a place at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry for the coming academic year. It listed supplies. It noted that the Hogwarts Express departed from King's Cross Station, platform 9 3/4. Harry read it once, set it on Strange's desk, and stood up. "I need new robes," he said. "The school has a specific list." Strange looked at the letter. He looked at Harry. He looked back at the letter. "I'll have Wung organize the trip to Diagon Alley," he said. "And a wand," Harry said. "The list says a wand." "You'll go to Ollivander's," Strange said. "Don't let him make it into a performance." "You've met him," Harry said. "I've met him. He will absolutely make it into a performance." "I'll try to be boring," Harry said. Strange gave him a look that communicated, with absolute economy, that boring was not something Harry had ever managed to be, and they both knew it. Harry picked up his monograph from where he'd carried it in, tucked it under his arm, and moved toward the door. "Harry," Strange said. He turned. Strange's expression was doing the 4 inches apart thing again. "The wizarding world is going to try to tell you who you are," he said. "They have a story about you. They've had it for 10 years. They're going to assume they know you before you open your mouth." Harry waited. "Let them be wrong," Strange said. "Not loudly, not as a performance. Just know who you are and let them be wrong at their own pace." Harry thought about this. He thought about all the things he'd been told he was, dangerous, unnatural, inexplicable, and the degree to which none of those things had turned out to be the right word. "I know who I am," Harry said. "I know you do," Strange said. Harry nodded. He went back to his room. He sat on his bed with the monograph and the Hogwarts letter side by side on the covers, and looked at both of them for a long time. The cloak, which had been hanging on the hook behind his door, drifted over and settled across his shoulders in the way it did sometimes, warm and slightly heavy, the way a hand on your shoulder is warm and slightly heavy. Harry looked at the Hogwarts letter. He thought about a world he'd never been to. He thought about the magical signature in Quirrell's auric field that Strange had described, dark, old, angry, looking for something, and the stone the letter mentioned in passing as being off-limits on the 3rd floor, which Strange had told him about, and which Harry had already read enough to understand the significance of. He thought about Voldemort. He thought, I know what you're looking for, and I've been trained by the best in the world. And I'm not afraid of you, not arrogance, just accuracy." He folded the letter. He put it in the drawer of his nightstand. He opened the monograph and went back to interspatial resonance patterns, because there was still a week before he needed to think about any of this in practical terms, and in the meantime the monograph had a theory in Chapter 7 that he was fairly certain was wrong and wanted to prove it. Outside the sanctum, New York went on. Inside, Strange sat at his desk for a long time after Harry left, looking at nothing in particular, before he picked up his pen and wrote a letter to Albus Dumbledore. The letter said, in its entirety, "He's coming. Be ready for someone you didn't plan for." He sealed it and sent it, and sat back, and thought about 4 years of mornings and training rooms and kitchen tables, and the particular quality of silence in the East Wing bedroom when it was occupied by someone sleeping without the green light finding them. He thought, "I'm not ready for him to go." He also thought, "He's completely ready." Both of those things were true, and both of them were fine. He picked up the next letter in his stack and got back to work. Chapter 3. The Boy Who Lived, and then some. Diagon Alley announced itself the way most magical places did. Not with a sign, not with a fanfare, but with a shift in the air, a slight thickening of the atmosphere the moment you crossed the threshold from the mundane world into something that had been keeping its own counsel for centuries. Harry stepped through the leaky cauldron and into the alley proper and stopped. He'd been to Camertage. He'd walked the mirror dimension. He'd stood at the edge of a pocket reality held together by borrowed dimensional energy and looked at the stars from the wrong side of the sky. He knew what magic felt like from the inside out, had known it since he was 7 years old, and he had a fairly comprehensive theoretical framework for most of what existed in the world's various magical traditions. None of that had prepared him for Diagon Alley on a busy Wednesday morning in July. It was the density of it, the sheer accumulated weight of a magical culture that had been living in one narrow space for hundreds of years. The shops stacked against each other, signs swinging in a wind that seemed to blow from a different direction on every street, owls in cages and cauldrons piled in doorways, and the particular quality of conversation that came from a place where everyone understood the context, and no one felt the need to explain themselves. It smelled like potion ingredients and old paper and something metallic and bright that Harry couldn't name. He stood in the middle of the cobblestones and turned a slow circle. "You look like a tourist," Wung said behind him. "I am a tourist," Harry said. Briefly. Wung had come instead of Strange, who had 3 converging dimensional incidents in Hong Kong that required his specific attention, and who had delivered approximately 45 minutes of practical advice, a Gringotts key, and the instruction to call me if anything happens, and by anything I mean anything, not just the things you think are worth calling about. Harry had promised. Wung had the expression of someone who was here professionally, but also found Harry in Diagon Alley mildly entertaining. "Gringotts first," Wung said. "Then the shops, wand last." "Strange said Ollivanders would be a performance," Harry said. "Strange is right," Wung said. "You want to have everything else handled before you spend 45 minutes in Ollivanders. He thinks it'll take 45 minutes. With you," Wung said. "Possibly longer." They walked. Gringotts was exactly what Harry had read about, vast, cold-marbled, staffed by goblins who moved with the particular efficiency of beings who had been managing other people's money for millennia and found most of those people mildly irritating. Harry approached the counter and presented the key, and was assessed by a goblin whose expression suggested that humans as a category were a bureaucratic inconvenience to be processed promptly. Harry was polite, direct, and did not perform either nervousness or bravado. The goblin's expression shifted fractionally, perhaps half a degree, into something that was still not warmth, but was possibly the goblin's equivalent of mild approval. The vault was deeper than Harry had expected. The cart ride was genuinely interesting from an engineering standpoint. The track system had properties that suggested dimensional compression. the caves too deep and too various to exist under one city block on any conventional spatial reasoning. Harry made a note to ask about it later and didn't say any of this out loud. The vault held more gold than he'd known about. Strange had been managing the finances practically, using what was needed and leaving the rest, and Harry had never had reason to inquire closely. He took what the school list required, and a little more for contingency, and they rode back up into the marble lobby. He was counting his galleons into his money bag when he heard it, a woman's voice, somewhere to his left, saying his name. Not his name like someone calling to a friend. His name like someone reading a caption. "That's him, isn't it? Potter's boy, the boy who lived." And then the second voice, a man's lower. "Can't be, he'd be 11, but look at him, he has the scar you can almost see." Harry looked up. A couple, middle-aged, staring openly from 8 feet away. The woman had gone pink. The man had the expression of someone at a museum encountering an artifact they'd studied but never expected to see. Harry held their gaze for exactly 1 beat, not a challenge, not a performance, just a moment of plain acknowledgement, and then looked back at his money bag and finished counting. Wung fell into step beside him. "Going to happen a lot," Wung said. "I know," Harry said. Strange mentioned the concept. The reality has a higher volume. "I'll adjust," Harry said. He did. Over the next 2 hours, as they moved through the alley collecting books and potion ingredients, and a set of scales, and an owl he hadn't planned on but who selected him in the unmistakable way of animals who have made up their minds. A tawny owl who fixed him with amber eyes through the shop window and banged the glass once with her beak, which Harry felt was fairly unambiguous. He was stared at in flourish and blots, identified in the robe shop with the enthusiastic certainty of the robe fitter. And accidentally, the center of a small crowd twice. Each time he moved through it with the same calm he moved through everything, and each time the crowd was slightly confused by the absence of anything to react to. He didn't look frightened. He didn't look overwhelmed. He didn't blush or stammer or look at his shoes. He just went about his business, which appeared to confuse people considerably. The robe fitting was the most interesting test. Madame Malkin's assistant had said his name loud enough to bring 2 other customers to the doorway, and then stood there expecting something from him, gratitude, probably, or wonder, or the social performance of a boy who understood what his own fame meant. Harry stood on the fitting platform and said, "School robes, please, the standard set from the Hogwarts list," and watched the expectation drain out of the assistant's face and be replaced by the specific blankness of someone recalibrating. "Of course," she said after a moment. "Thank you," Harry said. He was measured efficiently after that, which was fine. He was being measured when the curtain at the other fitting station shifted, and a pale boy stepped up onto the adjacent platform, blonde, sharp-featured, carrying himself with the reflexive confidence of someone raised in a house where confidence was simply the natural position. He glanced at Harry with the measuring look of someone performing an assessment. "Hogwarts," the boy said. "Yes," Harry said. "First year." "Yes." The boy seemed to make a decision. "Draco Malfoy," he said with the precision of someone for whom the name was expected to be recognized. "Harry Potter," Harry said. Draco went very still. His eyes moved to Harry's forehead, not the lightning bolt scar, which was hidden under his fringe, but the area, searching. "Potter," Draco said again. Testing the name. "I've heard things about you." "Most of them are probably wrong," Harry said pleasantly. Draco blinked. This was also clearly not what he'd expected. "You don't know what I've heard." "No," Harry agreed. "But I know what most people have heard, and most of it was decided before I was old enough to weigh in on the subject." He looked at Madame Malkin's assistant, who was pinning his left cuff. "Could you take the sleeves half an inch longer? I want room to move." The assistant adjusted. Harry looked back at Draco, who had the expression of someone who had prepared for several conversational approaches, and none of them were going the way he'd rehearsed. "You're not what I expected," Draco said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know," Draco said, which was possibly the most honest thing he'd said. "Something different. Fair enough, Harry said. He stepped down from the platform when the fitting was done, paid, and picked up his parcels. At the doorway, he looked back at Draco, who was still on the fitting platform being pinned, watching Harry with an expression that was genuinely difficult to read but was somewhere in the vicinity of interest. Malfoy, Harry said. Draco looked at him. The house system matters less than people think, Harry said. For whatever that's worth. Draco's expression went through several things in quick succession. My father would disagree. I know, Harry said, but you asked what I thought, so. He hadn't been asked, they both knew it. Draco knew he knew it, and something in Draco's face, briefly, acknowledged the honesty of the correction. Harry left. Wong was waiting outside with the owl cage, which the owl was occupying with an air of supreme satisfaction. What are you naming her? Wong said. Harry looked at the owl, who looked back with amber authority. Athena, Harry said. The owl ruffled her feathers in a way that he took as acceptance. Ollivander's was, as predicted, a performance. The shop was narrow and dusty, and smelled like cedar and something else. The same metallic brightness he'd noticed when he'd first entered Diagon Alley, concentrated here into something almost tangible. Ollivander himself appeared from the back shelves with the silent immediacy of someone who had been waiting, and his pale eyes found Harry before Harry had fully adjusted to the interior light. Harry Potter, Ollivander said. I wondered when I'd see you. Mr. Ollivander, Harry said. Ollivander looked at him the way the Ancient One sometimes looked at things, with a focus that went past the surface. Then his eyes went to Harry's right wrist, where the cord was. He looked at it for a long moment. Interesting, he said. You've been elsewhere. Yes, Harry said. And yet you're here for a wand, Ollivander said. The school requires one, Harry said. Ollivander moved to his shelves with the unhurried efficiency of long practice. Every wand chooses its wizard, he said, pulling boxes with a randomness that was actually, Harry suspected, the opposite of random. I remember every wand I've ever sold, Mr. Potter, every one. He set a box on the counter. Your mother, Willow, 10 1/4 inches, swishy, excellent for charms work. Your father, Mahogany, 11 inches, pliable, excellent for transfiguration. I know, Harry said. Ollivander paused. You know. Strange told me, Harry said. Dr. Stephen Strange, he had files. This was true. Strange had files on almost everything. Ollivander looked at him with those pale, fathomless eyes. Then he said, Try this one. Beechwood and dragon heartstring, 9 inches. Harry picked it up. Nothing. 12 wands later, and Wong had been right. This was going to take a while. Ollivander was pulling boxes from higher shelves with the focused energy of someone genuinely intrigued. Harry had noticed something. Each wand was giving him a faint response, stronger than nothing but not what Ollivander was looking for. As if they were approximately right, but missing one specific quality. He thought about his own magic. The current, the way it moved in patterns that Strange said were structured differently from ordinary wizarding magic. The camouflage training threaded all the way through it. Mr. Ollivander, he said on the 13th wand, do you have anything with a phoenix feather core? Ollivander stopped. He turned slowly. His expression was doing something that was beyond surprise and into something rarer, genuine emotion, specific and weighted. There are only 2 wands I have ever made with phoenix feather from that particular phoenix, Ollivander said quietly. One was sold long ago. The one it chose gave you that scar. His eyes moved to Harry's forehead, and I have always wondered whether its brother would find you eventually. He reached to the very back of the highest shelf and brought down a dusty box that had clearly not been touched in years. He opened it. The wand inside was 11 inches, holly, bone-white against the cushioning. Harry picked it up. The warmth came up through his palm immediately. Not the tentative flicker of the previous 13 wands, but something deep and immediate. A recognition. As if the wand had been waiting and was simply noting his arrival. Red and gold sparks cascaded from the tip and scattered through the dusty air of the shop like miniature fireworks, and the cedar smell intensified to something that was almost music. Harry held it for a moment. He felt it alongside his own magic, the current, the patterns, the camouflage structure, and noticed the way the wand adapted. not replacing what was already there, fitting around it like a hand in a glove that's been shaped to the specific hand. Interesting. Well, Ollivander said. He sounded moved, which Harry suspected was rare. Well. He looked at Harry with something that had resolved into wondering. Curious, very curious. The connection between wands from the same source, Harry said. Does it have practical implications, or is it primarily symbolic? Ollivander blinked. What? The brother wands, what does that mean practically, in terms of magical interaction if they encounter each other? Ollivander stared at him for a long moment. You are not what I expected, he said. I keep hearing that, Harry said. He paid for the wand, 7 galleons, which given what it was seemed like an undercharge. He walked out of Ollivander's into the late afternoon Diagon Alley light with Athena on his arm. She'd refused to go back in the cage, and turned the holly wand in his fingers. Wung stood with the rest of the parcels, looking at the wand. Brother wand to Voldemort's, Harry said. Strange will want to know that, Wung said. Strange will already know that, Harry said. He'll have read about it somewhere. He looked at the wand. It doesn't change anything. No, Wung said. Except that it confirms they're going to be looking at me expecting the prophecy child, Harry said. And I'm something they don't have a category for. Yes, Wung said. Good, Harry said. He tucked the wand into his sleeve alongside the sling ring, where it sat with the easy familiarity of something that had found its place, and turned toward the leaky cauldron. Let's go home. The 1st of September arrived the way important days sometimes do, bright and cold, and in a slightly better mood than the days on either side of it. Strange walked him to King's Cross. Not through a portal, not with any particular efficiency, they walked, because Strange had suggested it, and Harry had agreed because Strange didn't suggest things without reasons. They walked from the Sanctum to the station through New York's morning, and caught the transatlantic portal at the Sanctum's London contact point, which deposited them in Charing Cross, and then they walked the rest of the way through London in September. Strange was unusually quiet, not his usual working quiet, the focused internal kind, but a different quality, the kind that wants to say something and is deciding how. Harry let it be. They were on the platform at King's Cross, the mundane platform between 9 and 10, the barrier 10 feet away when Strange stopped. The contact protocol, Strange said. Mirror shard is in the inner pocket of your trunk. Break it if you need me immediately. Letters go through Athena for anything that can wait. If anything escalates to Strange, Harry said. Strange stopped. I know the protocols, Harry said. You wrote them, I memorized them, I could recite them. Strange was quiet. Harry looked up at him. Strange, who was tall and angular and stood in crowds like a stone stands in water, the cloak draped across his shoulders in that way that was both dignified and slightly absurd. Strange, who had sat on the edge of his bed at 3 in the morning and talked him through nightmares. Strange, who had argued with him about elemental theory across a kitchen table and never once pretended the argument wasn't equal. Strange, who had found him in a cupboard under some stairs and brought him home. I'll be back for Christmas, Harry said. That's 4 months. I know that's 4 months, Strange said. It is actually a normal length of time, Harry said. I know it's a normal length of time, Strange said. His jaw was doing the thing it did when he was working hard at being composed about something. Harry looked at the barrier. The families streaming through it, the wizarding world on the other side, waiting, the red steam of the Hogwarts Express visible to anyone who knew how to look. He looked back at Strange. You found me in a cupboard, Harry said, and you turned me into the youngest Sorcerer Supreme in recorded history. If I can't handle 4 months at school, something has gone seriously wrong with your training methodology. Strange gave him a look. That's not, I know, Harry said. That's not the point. Strange looked at him for a moment. Then he put a hand on Harry's shoulder briefly, firmly, in the way he did sometimes. That was not a hug and was also absolutely a hug. Don't hide what you are, Strange said. From anyone, I mean that. I know you mean it, Harry said. And don't let Dumbledore manage you, Strange said. He's good at it. He does it to everyone. Don't. I'll be fine. I know you'll be fine, Strange said. That's yes, go on then. Harry picked up his trunk, which Athena was perched on the top of with the imperiousness of a figurehead. He walked to the barrier. He looked back once. Strange was standing in the middle of platform 9 with his arms at his sides, and his expression had finally stopped doing the 4 inches apart thing and just looked exactly like what it was. Harry grinned at him. Then he walked through the wall. The Hogwarts Express was a genuine steam engine, which Harry appreciated aesthetically, and also approximately 6 carriages overcrowded, which he appreciated less. He found a compartment at the far end that was empty, stowed his trunk, settled Athena on the seat across from him, and had about 4 minutes before the door slid open. The boy who entered was tall, red-haired, freckled, and carrying a rat in his left hand with the distracted ease of someone who'd made peace with permanent rat ownership. He looked at Harry, looked at the empty seats, looked at Athena and said, "Do you mind? Everywhere else is full." "Go ahead," Harry said. He came in, stowed his own trunk with significantly less ease than Harry had managed, and dropped into the seat across from Harry with the satisfied thump of someone reuniting with furniture. He looked at Harry with the frank, uncalculating assessment of someone who had grown up in a large family and had no pretensions to social performance. "Ron Weasley," he said. "Harry Potter," Harry said. The reaction was familiar now, the slight pause, the eye movement toward the forehead. Ron's version of it was different from Draco's, which had been calculated, and different from the stranger's in Diagon Alley, which had been reverent. Ron's version was genuine surprise, followed almost immediately by something closer to curiosity. "Blimey," Ron said. "Are you, I mean, obviously you are, but—" He stopped himself. "Sorry, that was a bit— It's fine," Harry said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know," Ron said, looking at him. "Everyone has this story about you, haven't they? Like the chosen one, the one who survived the whole thing. And here you are, just sitting in a compartment." He seemed to find this charming rather than disappointing. "Where have you been? Someone said you were with relatives in Surrey, but no one really knows." "New York," Harry said. "Mostly." "New York," Ron repeated. "What were you doing in New York?" "Training," Harry said. "Training what?" "Magic," Harry said. "Not Hogwarts magic, different magic." Ron considered this with the particular open-minded quality of someone raised in a house where magic was simply normal, and the idea of more of it wasn't threatening. "Is it brilliant?" "Yes," Harry said honestly. Ron nodded like this was all the information he needed. "I'm the youngest of 6, he said, seemingly by way of explaining his total absence of starstruck behavior. "Bill, Charlie, Percy, Fred and George are in 3rd year. They're going to be a menace. They already are a menace. Grew up knowing more about magic than I sometimes want to." He looked at Harry. "You have no idea what any of this is like, do you? Coming from outside it." "Almost no idea," Harry said. "Some theoretical background." "Some theoretical background," Ron repeated, grinning. "You sound like Percy." "Is Percy academic?" "Percy is Percy-shaped," Ron said, "which involves a lot of syllables and a tendency to take his prefect badge very seriously." He said it with the cheerful cruelty of siblings, which Harry recognized as entirely affectionate. The compartment door opened again before Harry could respond, and a girl looked in, bushy brown hair, bright eyes, the particular focused energy of someone who had been moving with purpose and had paused to check something off a list. "Has anyone seen a toad?" she said. "A boy named Neville's lost one." "No toad," Harry said. She started to withdraw, then her eyes caught Harry's and went through the same recognition pause, except hers lasted approximately half a second before she moved past it in favor of something more pressing. She looked at his wrist, the cord, the sling ring with the focused attention of someone who recognized something significant without knowing its context. "What's that?" she said, pointing at the sling ring. "A sling ring," Harry said. "It's for making portals." She stepped fully into the compartment. "You can make portals?" "Yes," Harry said. "Through dimensional space?" "Yes." She sat down next to Ron, apparently having made a decision. "Hermione Granger. I've read about the theoretical framework for spatial displacement in Hogwarts. A history, and in a few supplementary texts I found in Flourish and Blots, but none of them actually described anything that worked. They all said it was theoretically possible, but she stopped. "Can you show me?" Ron looked at Harry with the expression of someone who had not been expecting this development and was finding it delightful. Harry made a small portal, 6 inches in diameter, opening onto the corridor outside the compartment. Clean, stable, controlled, and lasting for exactly 4 seconds before he let it close. Hermione stared at where it had been. Her expression was the one Harry recognized from his own reflection on good training days, the look of someone who has seen a thing they need to understand. "How does the boundary stabilize?" she said. "Focused intention establishing a geometric anchor," Harry said. "The ring facilitates the precision, but the stabilization is a trained mental construct, not the ring doing the work." "So the ring is essentially an extension," Harry said. "Like a wand, the magic is independent." "The tool makes it precise." Ron looked at both of them. "Right," he said. "This is going to be a very interesting train ride." It was. Hogwarts emerged from the darkness, the way the Ancient One had once described certain fundamental truths, not arriving, exactly, but becoming apparent, as though it had always been there, and you were simply finally positioned to see it. Harry leaned out of the boat. The first years had been directed to the boats, Hagrid enormous and warm ahead of them, the lake black and still below, and looked up at the castle as it came fully into view, lit from within, towers against the September sky, and felt something he hadn't expected. He felt it the way he felt the mirror dimension, a specific quality of layered space, rooms folded into rooms, reality slightly bent around the edges of the oldest towers. The magic in the stones was ancient and present, and had opinions about the people moving through it, the way the sanctum had opinions, but older, wilder, less curated. It was beautiful. It was also deeply, fundamentally magical in a way that had nothing to do with the formal training he'd received and everything to do with something older than training. He understood, sitting in that boat with the lake quiet around him and Ron on one side and Hermione on the other, why people who grew up going here felt about this place the way they did. It had a pull to it. Gravity. He also felt the other thing, the thing he'd been aware of since they'd crossed the Hogwarts grounds. The presence. It was low, careful. Distributed across the castle, the way a smell distributes through a building. Not located, exactly, but pervasive enough that you knew the source was somewhere inside. Dark and old and purposeful. Alive in the way a wound is alive, infected with something that wanted very badly to be whole and was making do with what it had. He felt it and catalogued it and said nothing. The Great Hall was everything he'd read about, and more sensory than the reading had suggested. The enchanted ceiling showing real stars through real cloud, the 4 long tables and their competing noise, the candles floating with the easy permanence of a spell so old it had simply become part of the architecture. Harry took it in the way he took in new environments, with the full sense awareness of someone trained to read spaces. He also felt eyes on him. Many of them, the whole hall, in stages, having the same recognition response he'd been getting all day, except here it was multiplied by several hundred, and had the specific quality of a gathering that had been waiting for this particular arrival for a long time. He sat down in the line of first years and did not adjust his posture or his expression. He looked around with the same open attention he gave to everything and let the staring be the staring. The sorting hat was brought in on a stool, old and patched, and it opened the rip near its brim and sang, and Harry listened to the song with genuine interest, not because it was impressive, but because the hat was clearly conscious in some meaningful sense, its thoughts organized differently from a human consciousness, but organized, pattern-making, evaluating. He was thinking about this when Professor McGonagall began calling names. He was thinking about it when she called Potter Harry, and the hall went absolutely still in the way that happens when everyone in a room tries to stop breathing at the same time. He walked to the stool. He sat down. The hat came down over his eyes and he was in the dark, which was familiar, and then the hat's voice was in his mind, which was not. Interesting, the hat said. Hello, Harry said. Most don't initiate the conversation, the hat said. There was something in its voice that was not quite amusement, but was in that neighborhood. You're a thinking entity operating at a high level of consciousness, Harry said. It seems rude not to. The hat was quiet for a moment. You're a Sorcerer Supreme, the youngest one. That's a first. Is that going to be a factor? Everything is a factor, the hat said. That's what sorting is. The factor question is, what does your specific combination of factors suggest about where you'd grow best? A pause, and Harry felt the quality of the hat's examination change. It was reading him the way the Ancient One sometimes read him, not the surface, but the structure. Your bravery is genuine, not performed. You're not courageous because you've decided bravery is a virtue. You're courageous because fear is a variable you've learned to metabolize rather than a condition you have to avoid. Gryffindor, then, Harry said. Patience, the hat said, sounding somewhat amused. Your intellect is the kind that doesn't stop. You are constitutionally incapable of encountering something you don't understand and leaving it alone. That's Ravenclaw to its core. Also true, Harry said. Your loyalty to the people you've chosen, Strange, Wung, the Ancient One, is absolute and unperformative. You don't advertise it. It's structural. Hufflepuff values that more than any other house. You're going to offer me everything, Harry said. I'm giving you the honest assessment, the hat said. Most students fall clearly into one or two. You're genuinely, legitimately suitable for all four. Harry thought about it. He thought about Strange saying let them be wrong at their own pace. He thought about Voldemort in the walls and about what it would mean to be where the people willing to run toward things were. He thought about Hermione on the train with her quick, relentless intelligence, and Ron with his warm, unself-consciousness, and the castle with its pull. Gryffindor, he said, but not because I'm only that. I know, the hat said, and its voice had warmth in it now. Gryffindor. The table on the far left erupted. Harry took the hat off and handed it back to McGonagall, who looked at him with an expression that was professional, and also, Harry noted, slightly assessing, the look of a teacher who has just received a student she doesn't fully have the measure of yet and intends to. He sat at the Gryffindor table, and Ron was sorted 15 minutes later and landed next to him with a grin, and Hermione appeared after him and sat across from him with her chin up and the specific satisfaction of someone sorted into their first choice. Gryffindor, she said to Harry. Both of us. Yes, Harry said. You took forever with the hat, she said. We had a conversation, Harry said. She looked at him. The hat talked to you? The hat thinks, Harry said. It makes sense to talk to something that thinks. Hermione opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. That's actually a very good point. I know, Harry said. Ron, already loading food onto his plate with the enthusiasm of someone who had grown up with 5 siblings and understood that hesitation had consequences at dinner tables, looked at both of them and said, I feel like this year is going to be either brilliant or incredibly dangerous. Probably both, Harry said. Ron considered this. Yeah, all right, he said, and helped himself to more potatoes. Harry ate and listened to the noise of the hall, and talked to Ron about Quidditch, which Harry knew in theory and Ron knew in the all-consuming, practically devotional way of genuine fans, and watched Quirrell at the head table. Quirrell was slight and pale, wearing a turban that Harry now understood with crystalline clarity, and whenever Quirrell looked up toward the first-year table, Harry felt it, that presence, that dark, purposeful pulse, focusing briefly and then moving away. It wasn't looking for Harry specifically. Not yet. It was looking for the stone. Searching, patient, methodical, it knew where it was and it was planning. Harry looked at his plate. He looked at the great hall ceiling, where the stars showed real and clear above the candles. He thought about what he'd told Strange before he left. I know what you're looking for, and I'm not afraid of you. He ate his dinner. He talked to Ron about whether the Falmouth Falcon's new seeker was actually as good as the press said, or was benefiting from inflated coverage. He answered Hermione's follow-up questions about portal mechanics with the precision she deserved. He felt the castle around him, old and opinionated and full of magic that had been accumulating for 1,000 years, and let it settle into him the way good things settle when you give them space. The presence in the walls continued its patient searching, 800 years of castle away. Harry continued his dinner. At the end of the meal, Dumbledore stood and gave his welcome address, and Harry watched him the way he'd been intending to, with the full sight, or what of it he could use quietly in a hall full of people. What he saw was what he'd expected from Strange's description, but richer in person. An old man of extraordinary magical capability, carrying the weight of an enormous number of decisions made over an enormous number of years, with the specific tiredness of someone who has been managing a very complex situation for a very long time. Wisdom, strategic intelligence, and underneath that, when Dumbledore's eyes found Harry's across the hall, which they did with the inevitability of 2 points of reference locating each other, a quality that Harry placed precisely as recalculation. He's reading me, Harry thought. He expected something and he's seeing something else and he's deciding what to do about the difference. Harry held the old man's gaze. He didn't make it a challenge. He didn't make it a performance. He just let it be what it was. 2 people with full information looking at each other and acknowledging, silently, that they both knew something significant was happening. Dumbledore looked away first, which was not a victory but was a data point. Harry filed it and looked back at his food. That night, in the first-year boys' dormitory, after Ron had fallen asleep in 10 minutes with the impressive efficiency of someone whose body made no distinction between locations, Harry lay awake in the dark for a while and looked at the ceiling. He thought about the presence in the building. He thought about the stone on the 3rd floor and what it meant that Voldemort was already here, already searching. He thought about the hat's voice saying constitutionally incapable of encountering something you don't understand and leaving it alone, and recognized with perfect honesty that this was accurate and that it was going to drive him directly toward the 3rd floor corridor before the term was a week old. He took out the mirror shard from his trunk. He looked at it. He thought about Strange at King's Cross with his hand on Harry's shoulder and his expression doing the 4 inches apart thing. He put the mirror shard away without breaking it, not because he couldn't handle it, but because there was nothing to report yet. Just a feeling, just a thread. He thought about what Strange had said once in the training room about patience. The difference between reckless and brave is not how quickly you move. It's how well you understand what you're moving toward. He understood what he was moving toward. He just needed more information. He pulled the covers up. Athena was on the perch they'd set up in the corner of the dormitory, her amber eyes glowing faintly in the dark, watching him with the serene attention of an owl who is entirely satisfied with her situation. "Don't judge me," Harry said to her quietly. She ruffled her feathers. "That's a judgment," Harry said. She turned her head away. Harry smiled at the ceiling. Outside the Gryffindor Tower windows, the Scottish Highlands lay dark and enormous under the stars, and the castle held its breath around the first years with the particular quality of places that have been waiting for specific people, and have finally, after some time, received them. He slept without the green light. For the 2nd year running, it didn't find him. Chapter 4. What lives in the walls the first week at Hogwarts established several things clearly. Charms was interesting. Transfiguration was interesting in a different way. McGonagall taught with a rigor that Harry respected, and a competitive edge that she applied equally to every student, which he respected more. History of Magic was delivered by a ghost who appeared to have died mid-sentence in 1492 and never recovered, which was less interesting, though the actual content, filtered through Binns's soporific delivery, had enough genuine depth that Harry took notes while everyone else slept. Astronomy was beautiful in the specific way of things that were both scientifically rigorous and aesthetically extraordinary. Herbology smelled like rain. Potions was Snape. Snape was a piece of work. Harry had read about him. Strange had given him a working brief on all the teachers at Hogwarts. The way Strange gave him working briefs on everything. Factual, unvarnished, relevant context included. Severus Snape, former Death Eater turned spy, Dumbledore's most trusted agent, head of Slytherin, and by all accounts in possession of one of the sharpest minds at Hogwarts and the interpersonal warmth of a North Atlantic weather system. The brief had been accurate. "Potter," Snape said, on the first day, without looking up from his desk. The word arrived in the dungeon classroom with a specific quality, not a greeting, a procedure. "Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormhood?" Harry had read magical drafts and potions cover to cover in the summer. He'd also read 3 supplementary texts on potion theory because they'd been on the same shelf and it had seemed wasteful not to. He knew the answer. "Draft of living death," Harry said. "One of the most powerful sleeping potions known. Asphodel is a member of the lily family, and the combination with wormhood creates a reaction that suppresses consciousness at the neurological level rather than merely inducing sleep." Snape looked up. Harry looked back. The quality of the silence in the dungeon had a particular texture, 60% Snape recalibrating, 40% the rest of the first years waiting to see what happened next. "And where?" Snape said slowly. "Would I find a bezoar?" "Stomach of a goat," Harry said. "Acts as an antidote to most poisons. The calcium carbonate structure of the stone binds to the active molecules of the majority of known magical toxins." Snape put down his quill. He looked at Harry with the specific attention of someone who has been surprised and is deciding how to categorize the surprise. "Where did you study?" Snape said. "With a private tutor," Harry said. "Primarily in New York. Wizarding New York." "No," Harry said. "My tutor isn't a wizard." The silence took on a new texture. Snape looked at him for a long moment, that black, depthless look that Harry recognized as highly sophisticated assessment dressed as intimidation, and Harry met it without flinching, without performing anything, just looking back. 5 points to Gryffindor," Snape said, which appeared to surprise Snape himself slightly. He picked his quill back up. "Open your textbooks to page 5. Hermione looked at Harry from across the aisle with an expression that was equal parts impressed and mildly put out that someone else had gotten there first. Harry gave her a small shrug. She went back to her textbook with the focused energy of someone already planning to do better. Quirrell's defense against the dark arts classes were the most interesting to attend and the most exhausting. Not because of the content. Quirrell's curriculum was elementary, nervous, and delivered with a stammer that Harry was increasingly certain was partly genuine and partly a very effective layer of camouflage. The exhaustion came from what Harry was doing underneath the class, running a constant low-level scan on the dark presence that inhabited Quirrell's turban with the patient focus of a parasite who has found a host and intends to make it last. The presence was more coherent than he'd expected. Not complete, not a full soul, not an operational magical intelligence in the way Strange would have defined one, but structured enough to think, to plan, to monitor. It watched the students through Quirrell's eyes with the specific quality of someone running calculations. It lingered on Harry longer than on the others, but not with recognition. Not yet. More like interest, the faint, nagging sense of something familiar in the signal. Harry didn't respond to the lingering. He sat and took notes on Quirrell's lesson about vampires and asked one clarifying question about Counterjinx methodology and gave the presence exactly nothing to work with. After class, in the corridor, Hermione fell into step beside him. "Do you notice anything wrong with Professor Quirrell?" she said, quietly enough that the other students streaming past didn't catch it. Harry looked at her. "What do you mean by wrong?" "He's very nervous," she said, "but it's not the right kind of nervous. Like the nervousness is a costume, and he smells strange." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Garlic," she continued. "He claims it's to ward off vampires, which we just covered in class. But garlic doesn't actually ward off vampires. That's a muggle myth with no grounding in magical theory. So the garlic is either him being remarkably uninformed about his own subject area, which doesn't fit with someone who passed the newts to teach at this level, or it's covering something else." Harry looked at her. She had, with no training, no sight, and no prior information, gotten approximately 70% of the way to the right answer through nothing but close observation and logical inference. "You're right that something's wrong with him," Harry said. She looked at him sharply. "You already knew." "I had a theory," Harry said. You just gave it better grounding. What's the theory? Harry thought about what to say, not whether to tell her, because Hermione Granger was clearly someone who would be an ally and was already halfway to the truth. But how much of the full picture served her better than a partial one? Something is using him, Harry said. Something old and dark. It's not fully coherent, it's more like a fragment of something that was much larger. But it's purposeful. It's looking for something specific in this building. Hermione stopped walking. Harry stopped too. In the building, she said. You mean the 3rd floor? Yes. The thing Dumbledore warned us about, she said. Yes. She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds, which was the amount of time it took her to process the implication of what he'd confirmed and start moving to the next question. How do you know it's there? How do you can sense it? It has a signature, Harry said. Like a sound, if you know what to listen for. She looked at him with those bright, evaluating eyes, and Harry watched her make a decision about trust, a conscious, deliberate decision, the kind that smart people make in an instant and stand by absolutely. What do we do? She said. Right now, Harry said. We go to Charms and we learn the Wingardium Leviosa and we find out more before we do anything else. Hermione absorbed this. Information before action. The situation is stable right now, Harry said. It's looking, but it's not there yet. When it moves toward the thing it's looking for, we'll know. How will we know? Harry thought about the thread he'd been tracking, that dark current, the way it moved through the castle's magical field like an undercurrent in a river. Because it'll shift, he said, and I'll feel it. She studied him for a moment. You're not worried, she said. Not even a little. I'm taking it seriously, Harry said. That's different from worried. She considered this like it was a philosophical position worth examining. Then she said, okay, and started walking again toward Charms, and the conversation folded back into the ordinary flow of the day, and Harry thought that Hermione Granger was going to be genuinely important to know. Ron found out 3 days later, not because Harry told him, but because Ron noticed. Ron noticed in the way of someone who had grown up in a house full of magic, and had an instinct for it that was less intellectual than Hermione's, and considerably less trained than Harry's, but no less real. A bone-level sense for when something was off. He came to Harry on a Wednesday evening in the common room, sat down across from him, and said, without preamble, "There's something wrong with Quirrell, isn't there?" Harry looked up from his book. "I sat behind him at dinner," Ron said, "and there's this feeling, like when there's a ghoul in the attic, except worse. We had a ghoul in our attic for 3 years," he added by way of explanation. "I know what a not-right magical presence feels like." "Yes," Harry said, "there's something wrong with Quirrell." Ron absorbed this. He had the same quality Hermione had, that decisiveness about trust once the trust was offered, that willingness to take an honest answer and work with it rather than push back on it. "Is it dangerous?" "Eventually," Harry said. "Not immediately." "And you're watching it," Ron said. "Yes." "Right," Ron said. He picked up his own book, opened it, and said casually, "If you need backup for whatever you decide to do about it, I'm in." Harry looked at him. "You don't know what it is." "Doesn't matter," Ron said. "You know what it is and you're handling it sensibly. That's enough for me." There was something in that, the clean, uncomplicated nature of it, the way Ron had offered without needing the full picture, that was different from anything Harry had experienced before in quite this form. The Sanctum was family. But this was something else, something that was being built in real time from scratch, and it felt like it had load-bearing capacity. "Thank you," Harry said. "Yep," Ron said and went back to his book. The troll happened on Halloween. Harry had felt the disruption before Quirrell burst into the Great Hall, a surge in the dark presence that was less directional this time and more agitated, the signal spreading through the castle's magical field like interference. Not searching anymore, doing something, using Quirrell's panic as cover for something else. Harry was on his feet when Quirrell started screaming about the troll in the dungeons. "It's a distraction," Harry said quietly, to Ron and Hermione as the hall erupted. Hermione had already stood. "The 3rd floor," she said. "Not yet," Harry said. "Hermione, where did you go before dinner?" Her face changed. "The girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor. I was upset." She paused. "The troll—" "I know," Harry said. "Come on." the corridors filled with the chaos of several hundred students being directed to their dormitories by prefects who were themselves uncertain. Harry moved through the countercurrent the way he moved through everything, efficiently, without making it a performance, using the gaps as they opened. Ron was a half step behind him, and Hermione's footsteps were quick and focused behind Ron. They found the troll in the second-floor corridor, 20 seconds before they would have found it in the same corridor as the bathroom. It was roughly 12 feet tall, gray-skinned, possessed of the specific empty-eyed purposefulness of a creature that had been pointed at a direction and told to go. It turned toward them with the slow, massive certainty of something that moved in terms of force rather than intelligence. The club it was carrying had left a dent in the stone wall that was 6 inches deep. Harry looked at it. The troll looked at him. "Get back," Harry said to Ron and Hermione, and the quality of his voice, flat, professional, entirely without alarm, made them both step back immediately. The troll swung the club. Harry was not in the space where the club arrived. He'd moved before it committed. Not a dramatic leap, just a sidestep with the timing Wung had spent 2 years drilling into his body. The club went through the air 6 inches from where he'd been and embedded itself in the stone wall with a crack that sent plaster dust into the corridor. The troll tried to wrench the club back. Harry gave it a half-second, enough for the troll to be committed to the extraction, and then brought both hands up and sealed the club in a containment ring, anchored to the wall. The club stayed embedded. The troll stayed attached to the club by the simple mechanism of not letting go. Harry stepped forward while the troll was occupied with the contradiction of an object it expected to move not moving, placed one hand on the stone wall beside the troll's left knee, and sent a targeted sleep pull through the containment, not aggressive, not damaging, just a directional drain on the troll's consciousness that pulled it from agitation down through quiet to asleep in approximately 8 seconds. The troll sat down. Heavily. The floor shook. Then it slumped sideways against the wall, still breathing, deeply and noisily unconscious. Harry released the containment ring. The club fell. He turned around. Ron and Hermione were looking at him from the far end of the corridor with the specific expression of people who had understood, intellectually, that Harry was capable, and were now recalibrating what intellectually understanding that had actually meant. Ron found his voice first. 30 seconds, he said. About that, Harry said. You didn't even use a wand. It didn't need a wand, Harry said. Are you both all right? Fine, Hermione said in a slightly compressed voice. Good. Harry looked at the troll. We should go. McGonagall is going to find this corridor in about 2 minutes. They went. They were not quite quick enough. McGonagall, Quirrell, and Snape rounded the far corner as they reached the end of the corridor, and the 3 professors stopped at the sight of a 12-foot troll unconscious against a wall with no apparent reason why. McGonagall's eyes found the 3 of them immediately. Her expression had several layers. The top layer was what it always was, composed and precise, but underneath was the specific expression of a woman performing very fast arithmetic. Would one of you, she said with extraordinary control, like to explain what has happened here? I contained it and put it to sleep, Harry said. No one is hurt. The troll is fine. It'll wake up in about 4 hours. It was brought in as a distraction. Snape's eyes narrowed. A distraction, he said. By whom? I don't know yet, Harry said, which was true in the narrow technical sense that he hadn't confirmed anything, though the dark presence currently feeling like agitated static through the castle's field was doing the equivalent of leaving footprints. Quirrell in the back was quiet. Harry had not looked directly at him since they'd encountered the professors. He didn't now. He kept his attention on McGonagall, who was the relevant authority here, and waited. You put a fully grown mountain troll to sleep, McGonagall said. At 11 years old. Yes, Harry said. She looked at him, then at the troll, then at him. Then she did what Harry had come to recognize as the McGonagall version of recalibration, a single, very controlled breath in and a repositioning of her overall approach to the situation. 5 points to Gryffindor each, she said. 4, she paused, quick thinking and preventing harm, and 20 points from Gryffindor for being in the corridors when you were directed to your dormitories. That's a net loss, Ron said. Mr. Weasley, McGonagall said. Right, Ron said. Going. They went. Dumbledore's office was exactly what Harry had expected. Layered, interesting, full of objects that had been accumulating magical resonance for decades. The quality of space that forms around a person who has spent long years in one place doing significant things. The portraits of previous headmasters made it feel like a room that was also a crowd. The sorting hat sat on its shelf looking pleased with itself. The pensive was covered. Fawkes was on his perch, which Harry had not expected to find as moving as he did. The phoenix looking at him with eyes of such extraordinary and uncomplicated warmth that Harry stood still for a moment just receiving it. Dumbledore stood by the window with his hands clasped, and Harry sat in the chair across from his desk, and they looked at each other. It was, Harry thought, the most specific quality of mutual assessment he'd ever been part of. Dumbledore was reading him the way the Ancient One read things, not the surface, the structure, and Harry was reading Dumbledore the same way, and both of them knew the other was doing it, and neither of them pretended otherwise. Dumbledore spoke first. "The troll," he said. "I handled it," Harry said. "In a manner that none of my staff could fully reconstruct from the evidence," Dumbledore said. "The troll is sedated, not stunned, not immobilized in any way my people recognize. The containment field on the wall, which they apparently observed briefly, dissolved without leaving a trace. These are not techniques taught at Hogwarts." "No," Harry said, "they're not." "Camertage," Dumbledore said. Harry met his eyes. "You did your research." "I received a letter," Dumbledore said, "from Dr. Strange some weeks ago." He paused. It was brief. "What did it say?" Dumbledore's expression did something subtle, that quality Harry had noticed at the sorting feast, the recalculation. "It said you were coming, and that I should be ready for someone I hadn't planned for." A pause. "He was right." "He usually is," Harry said. "You're not what I expected," Dumbledore said. Harry looked at him. "You expected the boy who lived in the prophecy," he said. "Isolated, raised by people who didn't understand what he was. Coming here with enough magic to be significant but no framework for it, looking for guidance, looking for belonging. Someone you could shape." The word shape landed carefully. Not an accusation, Harry had said it with the precision of someone naming a thing accurately, not bitterly. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "that is something like what I expected." "I'm not that," Harry said. "No," Dumbledore agreed. "You are very much not that." He moved to his desk and sat, and his eyes on Harry had a quality that was shifting. The strategic layer was still there, that grand, patient intelligence that Strange had described as a chess player who's been playing the same game for 60 years and knows more of the board than anyone else. But underneath it, something was opening that looked less like strategy and more like genuine interest. "What are you then, Mr. Potter?" "The same thing the prophecy says," Harry said. "Just better prepared." Dumbledore's mouth moved. It might have been a smile. "Strange has given you a great deal." "Yes," Harry said, "and in return—" "He has a son," Harry said. "He'd say that's not a return, it's just a thing, but it is one." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Fawkes made a soft sound from his perch, the kind of sound that felt like punctuation. "There is something in this school," Dumbledore said. "Something I arranged for to keep it safe. Something I suspect you are already aware of." "The Philosopher's Stone," Harry said. "Yes." Dumbledore's expression didn't change, which was itself a tell. The absence of surprise from a man who was very good at expressing appropriate surprise when he actually felt it. "And the thing looking for it," Harry said. "Also, yes," Dumbledore said quietly. "It used the troll tonight as a distraction," Harry said. "It was trying to access the third floor while the castle was in chaos. It didn't make it." He paused. "Whoever is helping it in this building other than Quirrell should be looked at carefully. There's been something moving through the castle's magical field for weeks. 2 signatures, not one." Dumbledore went very still. 2 signatures. "One is in Quirrell," Harry said. "The other is ambient, moving. I don't have a fixed point for it yet." The office was very quiet. Fawkes watched them both. Dumbledore's fingers, Harry noticed, had stopped their habitual light tapping on the desk. "You have been scanning the castle," Dumbledore said. "Since you arrived." "Continuously," Harry said. "Quietly." Dumbledore looked at him across the desk, looked at him with an expression that was resolving, finally, from calculation into something more honest. An old man who has been carrying a very large weight for a very long time, looking at someone who is apparently also capable of carrying weight, and deciding what that meant. "The stone must not reach Voldemort," Dumbledore said. "I know," Harry said. "The stone's security will hold for now. When it doesn't hold anymore, I'll be there." "You're 11 years old," Dumbledore said. Not as an argument, more like a fact he was presenting for consideration to see how Harry received it. "I'm the Sorcerer Supreme," Harry said. "The age is incidental." Dumbledore held his gaze for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need from me?" Harry thought about that. It was a significant offer. Dumbledore did not ask that question easily, and Harry knew it. He thought about what Strange would have said. Ask for what's actually useful, not what demonstrates your independence. "Information," Harry said. "When you know something relevant, I'd like to know it too. I'm not asking to be in your confidence on everything, just on this." "Agreed," Dumbledore said. "And I'd like the freedom to move in the castle at night if I determine it's necessary," Harry said. Dumbledore studied him. "That's a significant. I'm not asking to wander," Harry said. "I'm asking for operational latitude when the situation calls for it." A pause. "Agreed," Dumbledore said, "on the understanding that it is not a blanket permission and that there are conversations before any significant action." "I'll try," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him with a kind of wary appreciation. "Dr. Strange raised you well," he said. "He did," Harry said. "He also clearly gave you his negotiating style," Dumbledore said. "I learned from the best," Harry said. Dumbledore's expression finally arrived at a smile, a genuine one, deeper than the polished version, the kind that came from somewhere that didn't perform. "Go back to your dormitory, Mr. Potter," he said. "It's past midnight." Harry stood. He was at the door when Dumbledore said, "The Mirror of Arist is on the 3rd floor. The stone is behind it." Harry paused with his hand on the door frame. "I mention it," Dumbledore said, "because you strike me as someone who will find it regardless, and I'd rather you understand what it is before you look into it." Harry turned. "What does it show?" "The deepest desire of your heart," Dumbledore said. "Whatever you want most, whatever you do not have." A pause. "It is not a comfortable mirror." "No good mirror is," Harry said. He left. He went back to Gryffindor Tower through corridors that were entirely empty, the castle breathing around him with its midnight quality, old and opinionated, and Harry felt, faintly approving of the conversation that had just concluded, the way an old house approves when its people finally say what needs to be said. He went to the 3rd floor 4 days later, not because the situation required it yet. The dark presence in Quirrell was still in the searching, observing phase, but because of the mirror, and because Dumbledore had been right. He would find it regardless, and there was no sensible reason to wait. The 3rd floor corridor was sealed by a locked door that opened to a Alohomora, behind which a very large 3-headed dog was sleeping on top of a trap door, and behind the next passage, a series of obstacles that Harry walked through with the systematic efficiency of someone who had encountered considerably more complex security in his career. He noted each one. He noted the chess board particularly, which was sophisticated enough to suggest genuine magical intelligence, and the logic puzzle, which was the kind of thing that was not actually difficult if you had a grounding in formal logic, which Harry did, and the potions challenge, which required botanical knowledge he happened to have, and he filed all of it, and at the end was a chamber with a mirror. The Mirror of Arist was tall, ornate, its frame carved with words that ran around it in a loop. Arist stra eru oit ube kafru oit on wosi. Harry stood in front of it. The inscription reversed itself in his mind. "I show not your face, but your heart's desire." He looked into it. He'd half expected Strange, or the Sanctum, or some representation of power or capability, the kind of desire that made sense for someone who had been training toward something. He'd half expected his parents, because that was what Dumbledore had implied, the classic absence, the fundamental lack. What he saw was simpler than either of those. He saw a table. A kitchen table, not the sanctum's kitchen, but somewhere that had elements of it, and elements of other places too, warm and lit. Strange was at one end, reading, and the cloak was draped over a chair back, and there was a second cup of tea on the table that was clearly for Harry, and the window showed not New York and not London and not Camertage, but somewhere that didn't exist yet. A place that had been built by choice rather than inherited. He stood with his parents, two people he'd only seen in photographs, who looked at him in the mirror with expressions he didn't entirely know what to do with, and whose presence in the image sat beside Strange and Wung and the warm kitchen table without contradiction, without hierarchy, as if all of it belonged together. He stood in front of the mirror for a long time. It was not comfortable. Dumbledore had been right about that. The gap between what was shown and what was real had a specific quality, not grief, not longing, not exactly, but a kind of clear-eyed understanding of what wanting things meant. He didn't feel crushed by it. He felt its weight and measured the weight honestly and decided it was bearable. He looked at his parents in the mirror. He knew Lily's willow wand and the sacrifice she'd made. He knew James's mahogany wand and the man Strange had described, passionate, loyal, occasionally reckless in the way of people who were brave before they were wise, and then became both. He knew what they'd done. He knew why he was standing here and they were not. He put one hand on the mirror's frame briefly. "I know," he said quietly, to them in the glass, to the image of what wanting felt like when you were honest about it. "I know." He took his hand off the frame. He looked at the image one more moment. "I'm all right," he said, "for what it's worth." He turned away from the mirror and walked back through the chambers. He was halfway up the stairs to the main castle when he felt it, the dark presence, suddenly sharper, suddenly more focused, like a signal clarifying from static into language. It had found something. Not the stone, not yet, but it had found a path. It had spent weeks mapping the castle's magical field through Quirrell's extended presence, and tonight something had given it a piece of the layout it had been missing, and it had triangulated. Harry stopped on the stairs. He stood very still and read the signal with everything Strange had taught him, mapping the directionality, the intensity, the specific quality of a consciousness that had just understood something it hadn't understood before. It was going to move soon. Not tonight, but soon. He took the mirror shard from his pocket. He looked at it. He thought about the conversation with Dumbledore. There are conversations before any significant action, and about Strange's distinction between reckless and brave. He put the mirror shard away. He went back to Gryffindor Tower and climbed through the portrait hole and found Ron asleep and Hermione still awake in the common room with a book she wasn't reading, and she looked up at him when he came in with the expression of someone who had been waiting. "Well," she said. He sat down across from her. The fire was low and orange, and the common room was empty except for them. "It's going to move," he said. "Not tonight, maybe 2 weeks, maybe less." She closed the book. "What do we do between now and then?" "We prepare," Harry said. "For what specifically?" Harry looked at the fire. He thought about the chambers under the trap door, the specific sequence, the specific challenges, the way each one was designed to stop someone coming down from above and would be considerably less effective against someone who had already seen them all. "I need to write a letter," Harry said. "To Strange." "The mirror shard," Hermione said. "Not for help," Harry said. "For information. There's a detail about the stone itself that I need to confirm." He looked at her. "And I need you to help me with the chessboard." She blinked. "The chessboard. There's a life-size wizard chess set in the 3rd-floor passage," Harry said. "It's the kind that uses real pieces in real positions with real magical intelligence. Ron is the best chess player I know." Hermione stared at him. Then she said slowly, "You went down there already." "I needed to see the layout," Harry said. "Harry the Cerberus, Fluffy," Harry said. "Hagrid named it Fluffy. It's asleep most of the time and music puts it fully under. I was very quiet." Hermione pressed her lips together in the expression she had when she was simultaneously exasperated and unable to find a logical flaw in someone's reasoning. "Cerberus," she said. "You just 3-headed dog," Harry said. Large but not conceptually different from other obstacles. The real complexity is the chess set. He paused. I'm not minimizing it, I'm telling you what I actually assessed. She stared at him for a moment. How are you this calm? I've been trained by very exacting people, Harry said, and I've seen worse. Worse than a Cerberus. Considerably, Harry said. Hermione looked at him with the expression she sometimes had, that particular mix of impressment and the specific frustration of someone who is used to being the most prepared person in the room and has had to revise that. It was not an unpleasant expression. It had honesty in it. Fine, she said. We'll talk to Ron tomorrow. Thank you, Harry said. She picked her book back up, then set it down again. The mirror, she said. Dumbledore mentioned it to you, didn't he? I could tell when you came in. What did you see? Harry considered the question. He looked at the fire. A kitchen table, he said, with people I love at it. She was quiet for a moment. That's not an easy thing to see in a mirror that shows what you don't have, she said. No, Harry said, but it was honest. She nodded once, with a gravity that was entirely genuine, and went back to her book. And Harry looked at the fire and thought about what honest wanting meant, and what it meant to know the gap between it and reality and carry both without either crushing you. Outside the tower windows, the Scottish Highlands went on in the dark, and the castle breathed around them both, and somewhere in the walls the dark presence hummed and planned with the patience of something that had been waiting for years and could afford to wait a little longer. Harry would not let it wait much longer than that, but for now, the fire and Hermione's quiet presence, and the letter he'd write in the morning to Strange, who would read the technical detail Harry needed and write back within the day, and would not, Harry was certain, be remotely surprised at any of what Harry had been doing. He'd be precise and exacting about the mirror of heiressed detail. He'd probably also include something at the end, not a question, Strange, rarely asked direct questions about the things that mattered most. It wasn't his method, but something that was in the vicinity of asking. Harry would answer honestly. The fire burned down. Hermione turned a page. The castle held its breath. Chapter 5. The Philosopher's Stone and the fire beneath everything Strange's letter arrived on a Thursday. Athena dropped it on Harry's breakfast plate with the self-possessed efficiency she brought to all her tasks, ruffled her feathers once at Ron's toast, and took herself back to the owlery. Harry opened the letter. It was 2 pages. The first page was the technical information he'd asked for, written in Strange's precise, slightly cramped hand, with a diagram of the stone's magical signature, and a breakdown of what the resurrection aspect of the stone would mean for a fragmented soul trying to reconstitute itself. Dense, useful, exactly what Harry had needed. The second page was shorter. Your last letter mentioned the mirror. You said you understood what you saw. I'm going to take you at your word on that because you're generally accurate about yourself. But when you're back at Christmas, I want to talk about it properly. Not a debrief, just a conversation. The second signature you mentioned, the ambient one that isn't Quirrell, I've been thinking about it. The castle has paintings, hundreds of them. Some of those paintings will have loyalties that predate Dumbledore's tenure by a significant margin. Worth considering. Don't do anything without backup. I know you're going to do the thing regardless of whether I say this, but I want it on record that I said it. Call me before you go in. Not after, before. Harry folded the letter. He thought about the painting's comment, thought about it with the specific quality of attention that came from a piece of information arriving at the right moment. He'd been tracking the ambient signature for weeks, mapping its movement, and it had a pattern he hadn't been able to explain. It moved through walls, not through corridors. Through walls, with the specificity of something that knew the castle's internal structure intimately, and was using pathways that didn't require physical passage. Paintings. Every painting in Hogwarts was connected to every other painting in Hogwarts. They moved between frames. They traveled the castle like a network. And if one of them had been carrying information, feeding Quirrell's passenger the layout data it had been missing, filling in the map it needed to find the path to the stone, "You've got the look," Ron said across the table. "What look?" Harry said. The one where you figured something out and you're deciding whether to tell us, Ron said. He said it without accusation, the way Ron said most things, direct and unconcerned and leaving room. Strange thinks the second magical signature is coming from one of the paintings, Harry said. Hermione's head came up. She'd been reading while eating, which McGonagall had told her twice was not appropriate at mealtimes, and which she continued to do because McGonagall had not technically forbidden it. The network, she said immediately. Of course, they're all connected. If one of them had pre-existing loyalty to Voldemort or was charmed before the war ended, then it's been walking the castle freely for months, Harry said, giving Quirrell's passenger exactly what it needed to find the route. Ron looked up at the nearest painting, a pastoral scene of a shepherd and some hills, with the expression of someone recalibrating their relationship with interior decoration. So the walls have ears, he said. The walls have eyes, Harry said. Which is more useful? Right, Ron said. He looked at Harry. So what do we do about it? Nothing right now, Harry said. If we identify it and the passenger notices we've noticed, it'll accelerate the timeline. Better to let it think the channel is still working and control what information travels through it. Hermione stared at him. You want to feed it false information. Eventually, Harry said, if there's time. If there's not time, then the painting is just an intelligence source for something that's about to move regardless. When, Ron said. Harry thought about the dark presence, had been thinking about it since he'd woken, running the assessment he ran every morning, and this morning it had a different quality. Tighter, more directed, the searching phase was over. The signal had the specific quality of something in the preparatory phase. Soon, Harry said. Days, not weeks, tonight possibly. Ron absorbed this. He put down his fork and said, Right, today in chess I'm going to work on the endgame scenarios. Hermione looked at him. We're not going to argue about whether we should go. I know where arguing with him gets me, Ron said, nodding at Harry. Approximately nowhere, because he's already thought of every argument I'd make, and he's right that it needs to be handled, and if I'm going to be there I'd rather be prepared. He picked his fork back up. So, endgame scenarios. Harry looked at Ron for a moment with something that was beyond gratitude and didn't have a cleaner name. Endgame scenarios, Harry said. It was 2 days, not one. Harry spent them the way Strange had taught him to spend the time before a known confrontation, not in agitation, not in aggressive preparation, but in ordinary life maintained with full attention. He went to classes. He helped Neville with herbology, where Neville had a genuine intuitive gift that didn't translate well into the formal exam structure, but was real and significant. He had an argument with Hermione about the precise mechanism of the Aguamenti charm that lasted 45 minutes and ended in something like a draw, which both of them found more satisfying than winning would have been. He played chess with Ron and lost, deliberately and without telling Ron it was deliberate, because Ron's confidence needed feeding and Harry's ego could take a tactical loss. He wrote back to Strange on the second day. Information was useful. Second signature confirmed as painting-based. Not neutralizing it, not enough time. The timeline is tonight or tomorrow. I can feel it. It's moved from searching to preparing. Quirrell spent 4 hours in his office this afternoon, and when he came out the signal was sharper. I'm going in when it moves, not before. Dumbledore will be drawn away. I think that's part of the plan, get the headmaster out of the castle. When that happens, I'll go. I'm not going alone. He paused. I'll call before I go in, like you said. But don't come through unless I call twice. I need to do this. He looked at what he'd written. He added one more line. I saw the kitchen table in the mirror. I just wanted you to know I saw it. He sent it with Athena and watched her go and thought about what it meant that he'd said that, and why it had felt necessary to say it before tonight. Dumbledore left in the early evening. Harry felt it, not the departure itself, but the way the castle responded. The quality of its magical field shifted fractionally, the way a room shifts when the steadiest person in it leaves. Dumbledore's presence was woven into the fabric of Hogwarts in a way that was almost architectural, and when it pulled away, the whole building registered the absence. Quirrell's signal detonated. That was the only word for it. The slow, patient, preparatory quality Harry had been tracking for 2 days suddenly surged. Purposeful, directed, moving fast through the castle's magical field toward the 3rd floor with the specific quality of something that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Harry was already standing. Ron and Hermione were in the common room. They looked up at the same moment, Ron because he'd been watching Harry's face all evening, Hermione because she'd been watching the castle's ambient magic through a detection charm she'd constructed herself, and which had been sitting on the windowsill for 2 days. "Now," Harry said. They moved. The castle at night had a different quality than during the day, not dangerous, but ancient, the way old buildings are ancient, the history of them pressing slightly closer in the dark. The portraits watched them as they passed. Harry looked at each one with the sight running, identifying the signature, and in the 4th corridor found it, a painting of a dark-robed figure in a landscape that didn't match the others. The magical signature bleeding off it like heat, the specific quality of something that had been charmed with intent and time and deliberate loyalty to something that had considered itself very nearly immortal. He stopped. He looked at the painting. The figure in it had its back to the room. Harry reached up and took the painting off the wall. He turned it to face the stone, landscape against the corridor, figure against the cold rock. "That's it," Ron said. "That's it," Harry said. "Just like that." "The complexity was finding it," Harry said. "Neutralizing it is just physics." He looked at Hermione. "Let's go." The 3rd floor door opened to Alohomora. The corridor beyond was dark and the door to the chamber was ajar. Quirrell had already passed through. Harry went first without pausing, into the chamber, past the large sleeping dog whose deep snoring echoed against the stone, and down through the trap door. The fall was controlled. Harry landed softly. Ron landed behind him, stumbled, caught himself. Hermione dropped clean and stood immediately. The devil's snare reached for them. "Don't struggle," Harry said, and the plant hesitated, not from his words but from the light he produced in the same breath, not lumos but something fuller, a warm, broad-spectrum illumination that flooded the chamber and sent the plant retreating with the speed of something reacting to a genuine threat rather than a candle. The flying keys were next. The chamber was vast and dark and full of winged keys circling at all heights, the old iron lock on the door the obvious target. Harry stood in the middle of the chamber and ran the sight across the swarm, looking not for the largest or the most obvious, but for the one that was trying not to be noticed, the one with bent wings and a trajectory that had the subtle evasiveness of something that had been caught before. He pointed without looking at Ron. "Broom." Ron had a broom in his hand before the word finished, picked one from the rack without hesitation, the way Ron moved when it was about sport, and his body knew what to do before his mind fully engaged. He was on it and up in 4 seconds, and the key made a break for the ceiling, and Ron cut it off with the easy intuition of someone who had been flying since before he could read. The key hit his palm. He dropped to the floor. Harry had the lock open before Ron had fully landed. The chess board. Harry stood at the edge of it and looked at the position, 32 pieces on a board the size of a small hall, white on the far side, black on their side, the pieces standing with the carved, patient quality of things awaiting direction. The white pieces were animated and looking at them, looking specifically at Harry. "My game," Ron said. "Your game," Harry said. He stepped back. Ron looked at the board. He looked at it the way he'd looked at it in the versions they'd run in the common room over the last 2 days, quiet, focused, in that particular zone that Harry had come to think of as Ron's truest self, the place behind the easy humor where there was genuine, deep capability. "We're black," Ron said. "White moves first." He looked at Harry. "I need to be the knight." "You're certain?" Hermione said. "It's the only way to crack the mid-game fast enough," Ron said. "If I control the knights, we get through in 6 moves. If I don't, it's 12, and we don't have 12. He stepped onto his square, and the piece he'd replaced disappeared with a sound like a gust of wind. Harry and Hermione took their squares. The board came alive. The game was 6 minutes and 20 seconds. Ron played it like he breathed, not quickly, but inevitably, each move landing with the certainty of someone who had seen 5 positions ahead since the opening, and was just waiting for the board to catch up with what he already knew. On the 5th move, he took a hit. A white rook swung and clipped him, and he went down to one knee and stayed there, jaw set, and said from the ground, "I'm fine. Go, the last move is mine." Harry looked at him. "It's a sacrifice play," Ron said. "I set it up from the start. When I move, the queen takes me and the king is exposed. You two have a clear path." Harry, Ron said. He looked up, and his face had the expression it had when he'd offered backup in the common room, the clean, uncomplicated expression of someone who has decided what they're going to do and doesn't need to discuss it. "I've got this. Go." Harry held his gaze for one moment. Then he nodded. He looked at Hermione, who was pale and furious and moving before he said a word. Ron made his move. The queen crossed the board and the pieces erupted and Ron went down properly, and Harry ran. The potions chamber was last. Harry read the logic of it in 40 seconds. 7 bottles, one to go forward, one to go back, the rest either nettle wine or poison, the clues in the positions and the sizes, and gave Hermione the smallest bottle and kept the one that was cold as ice, which was the one going forward, and looked at her. "Go back," he said. "Get Ron out. Send a message to Dumbledore and get Strange on the mirror, tell him I'm going in." Hermione looked at him. Her eyes were very bright. "I know you don't need me to." "No," Harry said. "I need you to do this. Ron needs you and Strange needs to know." She took the bottle. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was saying several things at once, acknowledgement, worry, and underneath both of those, something that was closer to certainty than concern. She'd made her assessment of him, and this was the conclusion of it. "Come back in one piece," she said. "That's the plan," Harry said. She drank her bottle and stepped through the purple fire and was gone. Harry drank his. The cold hit him like stepping outside in February, clean and sharp and clarifying. He walked through the black fire. The final chamber was lit with torchlight and full of the mirror of Arist. Quirrell was standing in front of it. He had his back to Harry, both hands raised, studying the mirror's surface with the concentrated attention of someone trying to extract information from something that was refusing to cooperate. He hadn't heard Harry come through the fire. Harry stood at the chamber entrance and looked at him and felt the dark presence like static, sharp and close, and underneath it the specific quality of something that was frustrated, that had been so close, had navigated the entire castle's defenses, had gotten here, and was now standing in front of a mirror that was showing it something it couldn't interpret, because it was showing Quirrell what he desired most, and what Quirrell desired most was not the stone. "Hello, Professor," Harry said. Quirrell spun. The turban moved. The presence spiked, recognition, finally a targeting quality that Harry felt like pressure at the front of his skull. It knew him now. It had seen him at dinner every evening for months through Quirrell's eyes and made its calculations, and now it updated them all at once and arrived at a new conclusion, and the pressure intensified. "Potter," Quirrell said. His stammer was completely gone. "How unexpected." "Not really," Harry said. He stepped into the chamber. "You've been getting sloppy. The troll, the second signature in the paintings, you were moving too fast once you had the layout." Quirrell tilted his head. It was a gesture that was not Quirrell, the angle too sharp, the quality too predatory. "The boy knows," the thing in the turban said with a voice layered over Quirrell's voice. "The boy knows quite a lot." "Yes," Harry said. "You are not what we expected," the layered voice said. "Everyone keeps saying that," Harry said. "Turn around and look at the mirror. Actually look at it." Quirrell, the thing wearing Quirrell, didn't move. "Why?" "Because you've been staring at it for 10 minutes, Harry said, "and you're seeing what Quirrell wants, which is not the stone, which is why you're frustrated. The mirror shows the viewer's desire. You've been trying to force it to show you a different desire. That's not how it works." A pause, the presence evaluated. "And you know how it works," the layered voice said. "I know how most things work," Harry said. "Step aside." He walked to the mirror. Not around Quirrell, past him, close enough to feel the cold that radiated off the presence the way cold radiated off deep water. Quirrell watched him with those wrong-angled movements. Harry stood in front of the mirror and looked into it. The kitchen table was there again, same as before, and in his hand in the reflection a small red stone. He felt the stone arrive in his actual pocket, a weight and a warmth, and kept his face completely still. The stone had gone to him because he wanted it found and secured rather than wanted to use it. The mirror's logic was elegant that way. He turned away from the mirror. "I have it," he said. The presence understood what he meant before Quirrell fully processed it. What came out of Quirrell next was not a person moving. It was a pressure, a collision, Quirrell's body used as a weapon with the specific efficiency of something that had stopped treating its host as an instrument and started treating it as ammunition. Harry moved left, took the impact on his shoulder instead of his chest, and turned the momentum with the technique Wung had spent 18 months teaching him, receiving force and redirecting it rather than absorbing it. Quirrell hit the stone wall. The thing tried again through Quirrell, faster this time, and Harry felt the second layer of the attack beneath the physical one, a tendril of dark magic reaching for his mind with the quality of something that had done this before, had slid into minds and found them empty of defense and made itself at home. It found Harry's mind defended. Not with a wall. Strange hadn't taught walls. Walls were rigid and walls could be broken. Strange had taught landscape. Harry's mental architecture was a version of the mirror dimension. Not a surface to push against, but a space that responded to intrusion with its own geometry, folding the intrusion back on itself, using the pushing energy to redirect the push. The tendril hit the landscape and the landscape moved with it and around it, and the tendril found nothing to grip, nothing to leverage, nothing empty enough to fill. The presence recoiled. Harry felt it, that sudden withdrawal, the shock of something that had never met that particular defense encountering it and not knowing what to do. For the first time since he'd entered the chamber, the static pressure in his skull reduced. He used the gap. He placed both hands on the stone floor and pulled the chamber's dimensional geometry, subtle, controlled, exactly precise, and sealed the space. Not a containment ring. Something older, learned from the Ancient One in a Camertage courtyard at 5 in the morning. A pocket boundary, the kind that folded the space it contained into a slightly different dimensional frequency and made it temporarily inaccessible from outside influence. The dark presence hit the boundary. "What is this?" the layered voice said, and now the layers were stripped and what remained was something genuinely old and genuinely furious and genuinely, for the first time, uncertain. "A pocket boundary," Harry said. "You can't push through it. You can't pull anything through it. The only things that exist in this space right now are you, Quirrell, me, and the stone." Quirrell's body turned toward him. The face had changed, the expression entirely removed, replaced with something that was the dark presence looking through Quirrell's features with complete indifference to what it was doing to them. "Give me the stone." "No," Harry said. "Give it to me," the presence said, "and I will give you what you want, your parents, alive. I can do that." The stone can do that. Harry looked at Quirrell's face, at the thing using it, and felt the offer register and felt something underneath the offer, which was the specific quality of a manipulation that didn't expect to work but was reaching for anything. "You can't give me my parents," Harry said. "The stone extends life and transmutes metals. It doesn't reverse death, that's not what it does, you know that." He paused. "You're scared." The presence said nothing. "You've been a fragment for 10 years, Harry said. Barely coherent. Living off unicorn blood and borrowed bodies, and the patience of something that refuses to accept it's finished. And now you're in a sealed space with someone you didn't plan for, and the thing you came for is in his pocket, and you can't reach either of them." He looked at the mirror, and then back at Quirrell's face. "You're scared of being nothing again." The attack came without warning, or the only warning was the cessation of all other sound, which was itself a warning to anyone paying attention. The presence abandoned subtlety and came as force, raw, dark, the kind of magical assault that was not precise but was vast, pushing against Harry the way a wave pushes, trying to simply overwhelm. Harry raised a sling ring portal. The force went through it. On the other side of the portal was the mirror dimension, boundless, empty of physical consequence, able to receive the force and distribute it across its inverted geometry without harm. The dark current poured through the portal and vanished into the mirror dimension's infinite planes, and the chamber went quiet. The pocket boundary held. Quirrell fell to his knees. Not from anything Harry had done. The presence was withdrawing from Quirrell the way water withdraws at low tide, pulling back toward whatever form it could find that wasn't actively being neutralized. And Quirrell's body was responding to the withdrawal with the specific distress of a person who had been hosting something corrosive for a year and was now being emptied of it all at once. Harry caught him. He crossed the chamber in 4 steps and got his hands under Quirrell's shoulders as the man went forward, lowering him to the stone floor with care that was deliberate. Quirrell was a victim of this as much as he was an agent of it, and the precision with which Harry had sealed the space had been partly to ensure that Quirrell didn't become collateral damage. "Quirrell," Harry said. "Look at me." Quirrell's eyes focused on him. They were his own eyes now. The intelligence in them was his own, exhausted and frightened and present. "It's leaving you," Harry said. "That's what you're feeling. Let it go." "I can't." Quirrell's voice was his own voice too, thin and shaking. "I can't stop it. I never could stop it. From the beginning it was." "You can stop it now," Harry said. "The boundary isolates it. It can't pull back in once it's out." Quirrell looked at him with the eyes of a man who had been carrying something unbearable for a long time and had been given the first real opportunity to put it down. "Let it go," Harry said again. A shudder moved through Quirrell. Then another. Then a third, deep and total, the kind that moves bones. And then he went still, and the static pressure in the chamber, the dark signal, the presence, reduced to a point, and the point contracted, and the pocket boundary pulsed once as something tried to find a gap in it and found none, and the signal dropped below Harry's ability to track it. Quirrell breathed. The chamber was quiet. Harry held the boundary for another 2 minutes. The presence had not gone. He knew that with the specificity of someone trained to know the difference between destroyed and dispersed, but it had been expelled from Quirrell's body and forced into the contained space of the pocket boundary with nothing to inhabit, nothing to use. A fragment without a host, a thought without a thinker. It could not act and it could not escape and it would not reconstitute in this space. He sealed the boundary permanently, a final layer, something he'd learned from a restricted text that Strange had cleared him for at 9 years old. Not a wall. A geometry that the presence could not navigate, wrapped around the fragment the way a shell wraps around a pearl. Not destroyed. Contained. The question of whether the fragment could eventually be fully destroyed was one for later, for Strange and for Dumbledore together, with better tools and more time. For now it was here. It was held. It was not the stone's problem or Quirrell's problem or Hogwarts's problem. He sat back on his heels and looked at Quirrell, who was lying on the stone floor with his eyes open, breathing steadily, staring at the ceiling with the expression of a man who has survived something he didn't think he'd survive. "Are you hurt?" Harry said. "I don't." Quirrell took a breath. "I don't know," he said honestly. "That's fine," Harry said. "That's a reasonable answer." He reached into his pocket and felt the stone there, warm, solid, real, and kept it there for now. He looked at the sealed boundary. He looked at the mirror. He looked at the door. He took the mirror shard from his inner pocket and broke it. Strange came through the portal in under 2 minutes. The portal opened in the corner of the chamber with that gold-edged certainty that Harry had spent 4 years learning to replicate, and Strange stepped through and took in the room in approximately 4 seconds. The mirror, Quirrell on the floor, the sealed boundary, the faint geometric signature of Harry's containment work, and Harry himself, sitting cross-legged on the stone floor with his hands in his lap, entirely composed. Strange looked at all of it. Then he looked at Harry. "Before," Strange said. "I called before," Harry said. "You called after you'd already sealed the boundary," Strange said. "I called before I sat down," Harry said. Strange crossed the room and crouched in front of him with the focused, diagnostic attention of the surgeon he'd once been, checking Harry's face, his hands, his eyes. "Are you hurt?" "No," Harry said. "Nothing." "My shoulder is bruised," Harry said. "Quirrell hit me, that's it." Strange looked at the sealed boundary. He ran his fingers along the geometric edge of it, reading the construction with the attention of an expert who is checking someone else's work and finding it precisely done. His expression moved through several things and settled on something that was complicated in the specific way of people who are proud and worried and relieved and still processing. The fragment, Strange said, contained, not destroyed. I don't have the tools for full destruction here, but it can't act or expand inside the boundary. The boundary will hold. For as long as the geometry holds, Harry said, which at this construction level is approximately, he thought about it, a long time, long enough for you and Dumbledore to figure out a permanent solution. Strange looked at him. You built that under combat conditions, he said. There was a gap, Harry said. When the first intrusion attempt failed. The mental intrusion, Strange said. He looked at Harry's face. It tried to get in. Yes, Harry said. The landscape held. Strange absorbed this. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back at Harry, and his expression was doing the 4 inches apart thing, but the gap was smaller than it usually was. You called before, Strange said, again, this time not as an argument. I promised, Harry said. Strange reached out and gripped Harry's shoulder, the unbruised one, briefly and firmly. Good, he said, and it carried more weight than the word usually did. Quirrell made a sound from the floor. Strange crossed to him in 2 steps and crouched, running a quick assessment. You need medical attention, he said to Quirrell, with the tone of someone delivering a diagnosis. The prolonged hosting has done damage. It's treatable mostly. He looked at Harry. Poppy Pomfrey needs to know immediately. I know, Harry said. Hermione was getting Dumbledore. Hermione, Strange said. Your friends came down here with you. Ron took a hit from the chess set, Harry said. He should be with Madame Pomfrey by now. Hermione got him out. Strange was looking at him with the expression he sometimes had at the end of particularly complex training days, the look of someone holding several responses at once and selecting the most appropriate. You're going to give me a detailed debrief, Strange said. Yes, Harry said. Tomorrow, Strange said. Tonight you're going to eat something and sleep. I'm fine. Not a negotiation, Strange said, with the tone he used approximately once a month when he needed to be categorical. Harry looked at him. He thought about the mirror, the kitchen table, the warm window, the second cup of tea. He thought about 4 years of mornings and the particular quality of waking up in a building that wanted you there. Okay, he said. Dumbledore arrived 11 minutes after Strange, which told Harry that Hermione had found him immediately, and that whatever emergency had drawn him out of the castle had been resolved or abandoned the moment she'd made contact. He swept into the chamber with his robes moving at a speed that belied his age and stood in the doorway and took in the scene with those blue eyes that saw everything. He looked at the sealed boundary. He looked at Quirrell on the floor with Strange crouched beside him. He looked at Harry. The stone, he said. Harry reached into his pocket and held it out. Dumbledore crossed the room and took it from his hand, gently, carefully, with the hands of a man who had thought about this object for a very long time. He held it for a moment. He closed his hand around it. The fragment, he said. Sealed, Harry said. Strange can walk you through the construction. Dumbledore looked at the boundary. Then he looked at Strange, who had stood and was watching Dumbledore with the contained expression he wore when he was in a room with another very intelligent, very complicated person, and had decided to be precise rather than expressive. Dr. Strange, Dumbledore said. Headmaster, Strange said. They looked at each other. It was a look with history in it, the history of Dumbledore's letter and Strange's reply, and 4 months of parallel knowledge about the same child. 2 men who had both, in different ways, been responsible for the shape of Harry's life, meeting properly for the first time above the object of a year's worth of converging plans. He did this, Dumbledore said, not quite a question. He did, Strange said. The containment on the fragment is sophisticated, Strange said. More so than I'd expect from the conditions. He built it under active mental intrusion with minimal preparation time. Dumbledore looked at Harry. That gaze, the one that saw the structure underneath the surface, the one that Harry had felt since the sorting feast, was doing something now that it hadn't done before, not calculating, just looking. "The stone needs to be destroyed," Harry said. "I know that's not an easy decision, but leaving it intact means leaving a resource that he'll come back for when he reconstitutes." "You believe he will reconstitute," Dumbledore said. "The fragment is contained," Harry said, "not destroyed, and the fragment is not all of him. He was careful with himself. There's more than this." He looked at Dumbledore with the directness he applied to important things. "You know that already." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Yes, I do." "Then the stone needs to go," Harry said. "And we need to talk about the rest of it, not tonight, but soon." Dumbledore looked at the stone in his closed hand. He looked at it for a long time. The weight of every conversation he'd had with Nicholas Flamel about it, Harry suspected, and every calculation about what it meant to destroy something genuinely irreplaceable for a reason that was not yet fully resolved. "Yes," Dumbledore said finally. "We do need to talk." He looked at Harry with an expression that was the most unguarded Harry had seen from him, stripped of the strategic layer, of the grand design quality. Just an old man looking at an 11-year-old who had just done something extraordinary and accepting, fully, that his expectations had not just been wrong, but had been wrong in a way that required him to rebuild his entire model. "Thank you," Dumbledore said. Harry nodded. Strange put a hand on Harry's shoulder again. "We're done here," he said to Dumbledore. "He eats and sleeps. Everything else waits until morning." Dumbledore looked at Strange with the expression of a man who was not accustomed to being managed and was deciding in this specific instance that it was appropriate. "Of course," he said. They sat on the steps of the hospital wing at midnight. Not inside, Madame Pomfrey had been efficient and firm, and had sent Strange out of the ward after confirming Harry's shoulder was bruised and nothing else, on the grounds that the ward needed quiet. Ron was inside, conscious and already complaining about the food, which Strange had taken as a sufficient indicator that he'd be fine. Hermione was sitting with Ron, doing what Hermione did, which was making sure everything was thoroughly accounted for. Harry and Strange sat on the stone steps outside the ward with the castle around them, and the late spring air coming through the corridor windows, which were the kind of medieval windows that didn't fully close and always let in a thread of outside. Strange had his elbows on his knees. Harry had his back against the wall. The bruise on his shoulder had been reduced to a faint tenderness by whatever Madame Pomfrey had applied, and the rest of him felt clear and quiet in the way of after effort, after risk, after the thing you were moving toward has been reached. "The mental intrusion," Strange said. "I know," Harry said. "We'll do a full review. The landscape held, but there were 2 points where—" "Not a debrief," Strange said. "Tomorrow, I said tomorrow." Harry looked at him. "Then what?" "I'm asking," Strange said, "because I want to know, not as an assessment. He stopped, restarted. As the person who taught you the landscape and wants to know how it felt when it was tested for real." Harry thought about it, the tendril hitting the architecture of his mind and finding nothing to grip, the sensation of it which had been both frightening and clarifying, the knowledge in the moment that the training had held. "Scary," Harry said, "for about a second, and then like it was supposed to happen, like all the practice was for exactly that and the practice was enough." Strange nodded. "You knew it would come to that," Harry said. "Eventually, the mental intrusion." "I hoped it wouldn't," Strange said. "But yes, that's why you started the landscape work so early," Harry said. "When I was 8, I thought it was standard curriculum." "It was standard curriculum," Strange said. "And yes." Harry looked at the corridor floor. He turned the holly wand in his fingers. He'd had it out during the confrontation, a choice rather than a necessity, but it had felt right, the brother wand to Voldemort's in his hand while he faced what was left of Voldemort. Something satisfying in the symbolism. "The stone," Harry said. "Will be dealt with," Strange said. "And the rest of it," Harry said. "There's more of him out there. Fragments. Whatever he did to himself before he came to Godric's Hollow." He paused. "Dumbledore knows, I could tell." "Dumbledore knows a great deal," Strange said, "and shares it in increments that he's decided are appropriate." He said it without resentment, an accurate description rather than a criticism. "I want the full picture," Harry said. "I know," Strange said. "You'll get it, not all at once, but you'll get it." Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked at the sling ring on his hand and the cord on his wrist above it. He thought about the mirror, the kitchen table, the window, the people at it. "I want to come back next year," he said. Strange looked at him. "Not because I have to," Harry said. "Not because of the prophecy or the fragments or whatever comes next. Because—" He stopped. He looked for the right word and found it. "Because it's mine. This castle. These people. Ron nearly got himself killed on a chessboard, and Hermione tracked a magical signature through a window charm she built herself in 2 days. It's mine, and I want to come back to it." Strange was quiet. He was quiet with the quality Harry had learned to recognize, not processing, not formulating, just being with something that didn't need a response to be real. "Then you'll come back," Strange said. "And the summer," Harry said. "I'm home for the summer." "You're home for the summer," Strange said. "And I want to do the long-range portal properly," Harry said. "With the backup anchor this time." "We'll do it in June," Strange said. "When your shoulder's healed." "It is healed." "When Pomfrey says it's healed," Strange said. Harry almost argued. He decided not to, on the grounds that this was not a battle worth having, and also on the grounds that Strange sitting on the hospital wing steps at midnight was a thing he wanted to sit next to for a little longer without making it into a debrief. They sat. The castle breathed around them. Outside, the Scottish Highlands were dark and large, and the sky had cleared sometime during the night. And through the corridor window Harry could see the first pale suggestion of the horizon beginning to lighten. Not dawn yet, but the thing that comes before dawn. The moment when the dark has done its work and the world starts to remember it has another option. Strange said, quietly, not looking at anything in particular. "I found you in a cupboard." "I know," Harry said. "I went there for a watch." "I know," Harry said. "Now you're the Sorcerer Supreme, and you've contained a fragment of the darkest wizard of the last century, and you've got a chess-obsessed best friend and a girl who builds detection charms for fun and a castle that I'm fairly certain has adopted you." "The castle is very opinionated," Harry said. "Seems like your kind of place," Strange said. Harry looked at the corridor wall. He looked at the window. He looked at the lightening edge of the sky. "Strange," he said. "Thank you," Harry said. "For the watch." Strange looked at him. His expression was not doing the 4 inches apart thing. It was not managing or measuring or composing itself into professionalism. It was just his face, honest and unguarded in the half-dark of the hospital wing corridor, looking at the boy he'd brought home by accident and raised on purpose. "Any time," Strange said. The dawn came in through the window. The castle held them both in the particular way it had been holding them all year, opinionated, warm, ancient, entirely certain they belonged there. Harry put his back against the wall and let the morning arrive.